Bum, bum, bum.
So, hello everyone, and welcome again to day 3 of the SunPy coordination meeting. And today we will be talking about a nice, easy topic to start off with affiliate packages and just that, really. And then the interesting sessions will be in the afternoon or after the break, where we'll talk about FIDO clients and time series.
What could go wrong?
Nothing controversial at all.
And so, to kick us off, Will, please. Oh, sorry, moderator and note taker.
I've been trying to take notes. Yeah. See how I go.
Sure. I'm happy to try and moderate the morning session, even
Sure thing.
So, Will, off you go.
Let's see if I can share the right screen here. Chrome tab. Yes. Okay, good. You can just see my slides, right? Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to do a brief update / overview of what's going on with our affiliate packages and kind of what's happened since the last coordination meeting. And I just realized I called this the SunPy coordinate meeting, which it is not. Great.
All
If
SunPy
only.
tends to coordinates.
It could be. Who wants to talk about coordinates?
We could probably spend a whole week talking about the coordinate sub-package as well. But today we are talking about affiliated packages. Okay, so the affiliated package system was laid out in an SCP4. I think this was mostly by Stuart and Steve, with the idea being that these are packages. Affiliated packages are outside of the scope of the core package. Provide functionality that's maybe instrument specific or analysis specific, but these are compatible with the sort of greater SunPy ecosystem. They rely sort of on core for their base functionality for things like coordinates or downloading data or reading in data, using base data structures like map, time series, etc. And just as a brief reminder, we have these sponsored packages as well, which include the things like the core package, NDCube, DRMS, SunRaster, and SunKit image, that are affiliated packages but are maintained by the project. So meaning we babysit the CI, we do the releases, but these are things that are outside the scope of core but are maintained by members of the project. So things that are affiliated but not sponsored packages are currently, we have 2, AIA-Pi, which is maintained by me but nominally under the guise of Lockheed, and the AIA team, and then PFSS-Pi, which is maintained by David. So since last time, we established a set of review criteria for these affiliated packages, and kind of laid out a workflow for what that review process would look like, and I'll summarize that briefly on the next few slides. So what we did was essentially take that SCP and kind of put that into practice. If we wanted to actually enforce the criteria that are laid out in that document, what that process looked like. And so we did that, and that's all on the website. There are reviews for all the existing sponsored and affiliated packages on the website. And then we applied kind of the last step after establishing those review criteria, is that we applied these criteria and this workflow to all of the sponsored packages. So this was the core, NDCube, DRMS, SunRaster, SunKit image, and then also to 2 affiliated packages, to AIA-Pi and PFSS-Pi. So we actually put this into practice, and it seems to have worked, again, for these 2 quite well. So what are these review criteria that we have? So this is a lot of text. This is from the website. You're not meant to read all this. This is just to kind of provide an overview of what these review criteria look like. So we have 6 of these. Functionality, which is essentially, what does the package do? Is it in the scope of solar physics? Integration, how well does this fit into the kind of established SunPy ecosystem? Documentation, it's pretty straightforward. Is it documented? To what degree is it documented? Testing, similarly, are there tests? Do they have good coverage? Are they run on a CI system? Do they use an established test framework? Duplication, is this re-implementing functionality that's already in the core package or other affiliated packages, or is it building on top of kind of existing functionality in the ecosystem? And then finally, the community, how well are the developers of these packages engaging with the established SunPy, PyAstro, Scientific Python community? And so the idea is that we have this stoplight system, shamelessly stolen from AstroPy per usual, of where we kind of rate the package in each of these categories using these different labels. And so each of these labels for each category has kind of a more detailed description assigned to it. But so, for example, like in the case of functionality, this could be a general package, or it could be like a specialized package. So that would be something more like an instrument package, where it's targeting a specific type of data, doing specific operations to a specific type of data. But a more general package might be something like SunKit image, where it's more applicable to a larger kind of set of tasks. And the idea is, okay, we go through each of these, and if there are if the package has no red scores and it is green in this functionality category, then it can be accepted as an affiliated package. If it has a red score, sorry, now I'm reading. So in between sort of the accepted and not accepted is provisional. So this can be something like if they're working towards meeting these criteria and it doesn't have a red score in either the functionality, duplication, or community. So it's in scope, right? It's not, it's not trying to re-implement stuff that already exists in the ecosystem, and these and the developers of this package are actively engaging with the community. Then we want to kind of encourage them to keep iterating on each of these categories and kind of get their package up to essentially up to the standards that we've provided, and we give them this provisional status to just sort of encourage that. And then, of course, if it's not these two, it's not accepted. So this is something that doesn't fit in the scope of sort of solar physics, or the kind of existing ecosystem. Or if it does, if we had a package that re-implemented coordinates in a way that's completely incompatible with the coordinate stack, like that's another example of something that wouldn't really apply, that we would not accept as an affiliated package. So I've kind of talked already through some of this, but in addition to all these categories, we established a review process for more formally what this would look like in practice. So to do this, someone who's interested in submitting an affiliate package would open an issue with the issue template on the sunpy.org repo. This role that I'll talk a little bit about in a second, the affiliate package liaison identifies a reviewer for that particular package. So this is an open review process similar to something like JOS. For people who have seen what their reviews like, these reviews happen all on GitHub. The reviewer then goes to those criteria that I just listed, evaluates the package against those, and sort of adds comments to sort of assess how the package stacks up against those criteria. If the authors disagree on those reviews, they can ask for a re-review or a different reviewer from the package liaison, just sort of like the editor in this whole process. At the end of that, they get some score based on all of these reviews in each of these categories. And if it's accepted, then we make a pull request to the SunPy.org repo, and then those reviews and results are posted to the website. And so all this information is on the project webpage on the affiliated page, which is at this link here. So just to kind of summarize and to think about where we're going to go from here is this is all great, and we've applied it to packages that several people in this meeting have developed and worked on. I think, and David has an open issue for submitting SunPy SOAR, the Solar Orbiter data access package, also as an affiliated package, so you can go in and kind of see what this process looks like live. But we haven't had any submissions really from people outside of the project. In particular, we haven't had any instrument teams coming to us to say, we want to make use of this affiliated package system. And I guess the question is why? Is that something that we need to fix? Do we need to advertise this whole process better? Do we need to adjust this process somehow to make this more friendly? Other tweaks we need to make to the review process. I think those are all things that should be up for discussion here. And then similar to what I was talking about with the sub-package maintainers the other day, we don't actually have an affiliated package. We've not formally designated someone to be the affiliated package liaison. I think in practice, that's been Nabil for the past year. But we should probably think about trying to maybe more formally fill that role, because this is obviously an important part of engaging with the community, the wider solar physics community, and sort of encouraging adoption of these criteria that we've laid out, and kind of better interoperability between all these components of this growing Python ecosystem in solar physics.
And sorry if I missed you saying this, but if we get the ROSES proposal funded, then of course we actually have a line of funding for the liaisons. So that would be nice.
Did not mention that. I'd forgotten that, but yes, that would be great, and yeah, would I think go a long way certainly to solving a lot of these kind of community engagement issues for sure. Yeah. So that is all I had, but I am happy to just fill the rest of the time with discussion, or depending on how we want to move into the next section.
So having just submitted SunPy SOAR, I would say the actual process of submitting was really easy and pretty frictionless. I guess I'm kind of unsure as to what the advantages of becoming an affiliated package are. What's the point of going through the effort of becoming an affiliated package?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's partially, and we talked about this a lot when we were either at the last coordination meeting or some sort of meeting in between, about what does it mean to really be. I mean, in practice, it means that we list the package on the website, right? And then with the review criteria. But then what does that offer? What does that offer maintainers of that package, I guess?
Well, the other question is, what does it offer the general user community? I mean, to go back to Craig's question of either yesterday or the day before, I mean, you could say that this is sort of visibility to the wider community. SunPy is a node, or a place that people go. It's got a lot of recognition, and so if people coming, I want to do this in SunPy, and say, no, SunPy doesn't do that. This thing does it. But if you're an affiliated package, it's easier to say, well, it's not SunPy core, but it's within the SunPy ecosystem. There's a certain amount of checking saying that we know that these things will play well together, and we recommend that you try. We don't necessarily recommend that this will solve your problem, but maybe not recommend it's a bit too strong, but we like advertise that people should investigate and be willing to see if these packages help them.
Right. Yeah, I think it's both sort of a discoverability thing, and then also, yeah, imposing the standards we want, on these things that are part of the larger ecosystem, which I think is maybe that's the biggest thing, is honestly the interoperability and the discovery. Like we're trying to impose interoperability across a wider ecosystem, and not just allowing for the proliferation of a ton of Python packages that don't work well together and that are all conflicting and overlapping. I think maybe that's the larger goal of this.
Yeah, it almost has like a stamp of approval by SunPy, and it has to meet these standards, so it's being looked after, and it's a package that's going to work, and it's not just forgotten about, I guess.
You could argue that this is a way of pitching, because people come to say, hang on, SunPy doesn't do everything they want. Why do I have to install all these multiple things and know about all these multiple things? In IDL, I just get SSW and it does everything for me. We're like having this ecosystem of affiliated packages. It's like, we're not going to rigorously connect these into a single package, but we're going to create a space and a terminology and a process by which you, as a user new to this, don't have to do all the discovering and all the investigating yourself. There's a quality check, there's just a visibility on them, and that promotes users to go to those packages, which ultimately helps the maintainers, because then they know they're maintaining it for a greater purpose.
Yeah.
I mean, you could argue it's getting closer to the idea of people's thoughts of SSW, where you gen tree and then you have packages associated with that work together. This makes sense then if someone's coming from that mindset.
Yeah. We let's face it. If I want to go and look at XRT data, if I was using IDL, the first thing I would do would be go to SolarSoft. I don't go to the XRT webpage and hunt around for software. And so I kind of like see SunPy as a vessel for a repository for all the software that I need for processing solar physics data. That's like actually, I've got a few questions about this, because you said that nobody's kind of really shown interest. We are the Punch team. We haven't put it down as a requirement, but it's in our documents that it's our intention to become an affiliated package. And whether this transpires, and the intention that it will transpire, I think will go down a lot to whether we can meet your criteria. And because I was looking at your list there, and I saw, for example, you talked about duplication. We're building this software for our data reduction pipeline, and we're probably not going to want to use some of the other functionality and some of the other modules, because they're not necessarily pertinent to our pipeline, which we need to be quick and slick and produce data which is required for us to produce. So we may end up duplicating some functionality. So, for example, originally we were looking, when we were looking at the original form of NDCube, not NDCube, what's it called? The sequence.
NDCube sequence?
NDCube sequence. Because we weren't really kind of like sure whether that would meet our needs, we were going to construct our own simple one, and that would have been duplication, but we would have built it exactly as we wanted it. But it is looking like NDQ sequence is something that we're going to use now, which is great. But there could be other examples, and I would kind of hope that we wouldn't get kind of refused affiliated status just because we had some duplication which was required for our pipeline. Because at the end of the day, meeting our requirements trumps meeting the SunPy review criteria.
Maybe sorry.
Go ahead, Laura.
No, I was just going to say, like, I think maybe this is something we need to change on the website to be like, it can be a conversation. It doesn't mean you have to come, and if you don't pass it, we say goodbye. You can come even when you're building it and saying, this is a hope for a future are these strict rules, or how do I go about, becoming an affiliated package or getting there? And how it's kind of harder to some people. Sorry.
Sorry.
I was just going to say from like my perspective / the Stix team's perspective, like we're going to have 2 packages. We're going to end up having Stix Core, which is stuff that does all the horrible pipeline and making bits files. And then we'll have StixPy, which is what we expect the community to use. And the goal, the plan, I mean, we're already using the templates and stuff, will be that StixPy will be an affiliated package. At least that's the current intention.
I was going to ask something along those same lines. I think especially when it comes to like the sort of nitty gritty pipeline code, like it would seem like, I guess, do you see that as a user facing? Does the Punch team see that as a user facing package? Is that something that users would ever kind of care about, or is that just something for the instrument team to sort of produce data products?
Well, the first thing to be said is we've agreed that whatever software we're producing for Punch will be available to the whole community. There'll be nothing hidden. Nothing hidden. Right. It'll be made available through GitHub or whatever we're going to use. And I'm not 100%. I can't give you I can't guarantee if that's going to be the way we're going to go. We're going to try and put everything towards you. The idea is that we are going to have this object orientated Python package with the idea you can just chuck your level 0 data at it and it will just go through all of the steps to produce the final data product, which people may want, and therefore maybe it does have value. There is some value of it being in the SunPy affiliated package. But now, just listening to, I think is it Sam Malone? Sam Maloney?
Shane Maloney.
Shane Maloney, excuse me.
Shane, yeah, sorry. Yeah. I was on mute there trying to take notes.
I've just kind of like took note that you've made the decision to separate the Stix package into a core and a StixPy kind of package. Maybe that's something that we could have a conversation about to understand your kind of reasons why you went down this road, and maybe that's maybe you've made some decisions that we're going to have to be making in the future. And you can kind of like help us out there, but nothing's kind of like set in stone. But the idea was that we're going to release all of the software anyway, and if we can make it part of SunPy package, then great. And we're going to be building. You're probably aware that we are building the transform software, which, yes, it's going to be used as part of the Punch pipeline because we need it to correct our the quartic fit to the optics, but it can equally be used by any optical system, and so it has value being part of the SunPy package. How we pack that up, I don't know, but
so if
at some point, probably not now, I'd like to talk to you about Transform, because having just had a more recent scroll through it, I think that if I were reviewing it for affiliated package status, I would fail it on duplication.
Okay. But if Transform was part of the Punch pipeline, would the Punch pipeline fail?
I don't know. That's an interesting question.
I think though that's perfectly reasonable for like a package, especially something like a pipeline where you're optimizing for performance. Like I think there are really great reasons for it not to fit into these review criteria, right? There might I think that is perfectly reasonable because the goals are just different.
These review criteria were not really built. This whole affiliated package system wasn't really built for pipelines. Pipelines are like very specialized, and most of the time the users don't need to run them themselves. So this is more about a library for Punch data analysis or something than it is the actual pipeline code.
I see.
At least in my head.
Sure.
Yeah, like my view on it, again, I'm not speaking for anyone else, but is that if you are talking about pipelines or like stuff that's very instrument specific, then that's the remit of the instrument team. And so long as like there isn't another Punch pipeline package that does the same thing, like to me, that's the level of duplication you're talking about. If you're using stuff, if you're reinventing stuff under the hood that the user doesn't see for, whatever reasons, for whatever implementation reasons, as far as I see, then then that's kind of irrelevant. It's more, is it user-facing duplication? When it comes to this question, anyway.
Right. And I will just reiterate what I said earlier. It's not decided yet what we are going to put forward to be in the Punch affiliated package, and it may be none of the pipeline, but we have made the decision that the pipeline will be made available through some source or another.
Yeah, I mean that's just to give you some other perspective. That's the same for sticks. So like all of the software to make the FITS files, it's already up on GitHub. Like you can go and look at it now, and it will be public. But the idea is that it doesn't really fit to be an affiliated package, mainly because it's horrible code, and I don't want to have to try and fix it to be like nice enough to get an affiliated package status. But yeah, I mean the idea there is that like if a user wants to and they don't trust the sticks team, they can go and prep their data from telemetry all the way through and change some stuff if they wanted to. But the normal use case will be that they'll get FITS files from the Solar Orbiter archive and then use StixPy and SunX specs and all the other wonderful SunPy tools that we're going to build.
Yeah. One of the reasons that we are looking to release the pipeline is because when we run the pipeline, as I said, we're building it in this object-oriented approach with the idea that each kind of method that we have to apply to the data to process it to the next level. So for example, removing cosmic ray spikes, as an example, that'll be one of the I'm going to mess up my terminology. I want to say modules in the object, but it's probably something else, function or something. But anyway, there are some people who might be interested in those cosmic rays. And so they're not going to want to go to our level 2 product, which has had the cosmic rays removed. They're going to want to go to the level 0 product, and they're going to want to process it in the way that leaves the cosmic rays in there, or it could be spikes or something else. And that's kind of like the mentality with releasing the whole pipeline, so people can use it and do whatever the hell they want with it.
Yeah, I think instrument-specific code is a bit of a special case. I think then what these criteria and what affiliated packages were originally envisaged for. Again, just speaking for myself, not the team, but if there's like an instrument that wants to work with SunPy, but and like help get their stuff out and make sure that it plays nicely with the Solar Python ecosystem, I think that's great. But instrument teams ultimately have jurisdiction over their data, their pipelines, and how they produce their data files. So I think that's probably up to us to work with those requirements and just make sure that getting it into the wider Python ecosystem is done in a way that is consistent and will play nicely with everything. But stuff like pipelines, that's the remit of the instrument team.
Well, I will jump in here and say that I have my own opinions of things that really bother me, namely whether it comes to the AIA coordinate information or the Solar Orbiter coordinate information or the GOES coordinate information. All three of those pipelines had issues in the coordinate information they included in the headers. And so if pipelining, so it's not really, to be discussed about exactly what that means. I totally understand a pipeline doesn't have to use the SunPy coordinate framework to generate this information. But if you're going to be working in conjunction with the SunPy ecosystem, let's not have inconsistent answers. And so I would say that it'd be good and prudent to have those kind of cross checks, right? Like maybe you don't generate all that stuff using the SunPy framework, but have a unit test or something to check it against the SunPy results and make sure you're not breaking consistency with those, such that if a user dives in and tries to do it what should be an equivalent way, they won't get a different answer.
Agreed. Yeah, I agree. I agree with exactly with what you just said there. And I might even kind of like torpedo what I said before with my next kind of comment question, and that was, again, because this is a data reduction pipeline and we're going to have to be producing consistent, within the pipeline itself, we're going to have to produce consistent data, which means we have to build the pipeline like a cathedral rather than a bazaar and make it work the first time, the intention was to freeze certain parts of it. And I don't know how that would actually fit in with the kind of the SunPy affiliated package status, because things will get updated. Perhaps NDCube gets updated and the version that we are using, we don't want to update because it's working fine in our pipeline. Do we suddenly then become an unaffiliated package?
I mean, again, I think similar to the kind of performance requirements that you mentioned, I think like pipelines have an extremely narrow scope and need to do a thing, like a kind of specific thing really, really well. And I think like Stuart mentioned, like the review criteria here are optimized for, you know, kind of units of user facing ecosystem of packages for doing the kind of like analysis on the data products that pipeline produces. So if the kind of, especially kind of pipelining software like that, if it doesn't fit into the, like, I think there's like very, very legitimate reasons that it won't fit into these categories. And I don't think it necessarily needs to, but I think the more important thing would be if the software that's produced, whether it overlaps with the pipelining software or not, the software that's produced to kind of work on the outputs of that pipeline, that's the kind of stuff that should really fit into these, or ideally would fit into these categories.
Okay, so what I'm kind of hearing from this, which is absolutely fine, is that perhaps the pipeline itself, whatever, sits in our GitHub account or whatever, and then the tools that will be developed, which is not necessarily going to be by the SOC, but some of the tools that are going to be developed to use the data, they're the ones that should be sitting in the SunPy affiliated repository package, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I guess maybe one thing that it wasn't necessarily explicit about in these slides too is that going through this affiliate package like review process, like
yes,
it's an imposition of standards, but at the end of the day, that software is still completely controlled and maintained and developed by the instrument team or whoever is submitting this for affiliated package status. So like AIAPI, for example, is still completely completely overseen by Lockheed or the AIA team, like development of that package, even though it's gone through this kind of review process and had this stamp of approval, that all the development is still overseen by the AIA team.
So so there's a couple of things there. Maybe I kind of like reiterate what I was getting at before, and that is what happens if AIAPI is using perhaps an old version of, it maybe it's using map, let's say it's using map from SunPy, and then suddenly you go down this road, which you were talking about yesterday, I believe, in terms of deprecating map and putting everything in NDCube, maybe. What happens to AIAPI at that point? Do you do a reassessment? Do they have to update?
So this is also another detail I didn't include on the slides, but is on the affiliate package web pages, that I think every yearly part of the review process is that every accepted and provisional package goes through a yearly review to check for exactly that kind of thing, to see if it's gone stale or certain things, if it's regressed in certain categories, maybe none of the tests pass anymore or something like that.
Right.
And then I can't remember, but essentially the idea is that we would then, whoever's doing the re-review would like ping the developers of AIAPI, i.e. me, to sort of say, why aren't you up to the standards here? Is there a good reason for this? Or maybe, it could just be in some cases that, someone doesn't have time to maintain a package, and that's okay. But that's the kind of stuff we wouldn't necessarily want to keep on the web page, because that would maybe mislead, people who are looking for things that do work within the ecosystem.
I see.
But I hope also that would be more of a collaborative. I'm sure you didn't mean it to come across like this, Will, but I don't think that we want to get on and say, hey, why aren't you fulfilling your requirements to us? It's like, by the way, did you realize that your tests are all failing? This might be it might be beneficial to your users if you we've flagged this for you to try and help. So I think it's supposed to be more of a collaborative exercise, not a judgment and punitive exercise.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's I think we tried to do everything we could to ensure that this whole process does not come across the way. It's not like a public shaming or anything like that to say, why isn't your software meeting these categories, or why are you red in all these categories? But certainly it's coming from the perspective like we want to help make the software ecosystem the best it can be, and we want to help you get these things up to these standards, because it helps everyone, if this is in the scope of what you're able to do.
Sure. Well, within our requirements, we've stated that we will follow the PEP 8 standards, and not in requirements, but in other documentation, we've said that we're also going to be following SunPy standards as well. So we are kind of paying attention to your webpage, and just kind of like a general comment to kind of maybe perhaps bring the conversation towards how to encourage other instrument teams to get involved. Perhaps you can produce the standards, so to speak, for producing software. I mean, we're quite lucky. We've got Craig behind us, who is happy for us to spend punch money producing the pipeline in the right way. Perhaps other teams don't have that or don't have the money for that. But we are paying attention to your standards when we're and PEP 8, both of them, when we're producing our software. And maybe that makes it easier for us to become an affiliated package, because our software should have conformed to your standards. And that's something you can, maybe when new teams are getting formed, maybe you can say, hey, these are the community standards, and you can produce the community standards for other teams to follow.
Isn't there that open standards documentation or agreement thing that went around like a while ago?
The PyHC standard document?
Yeah, something like that.
Can you repeat the name of that, please?
I can't remember what it is.
So PyHC though is Python in Heliophysics community. So there's a web page going back to
heliopython.org.
Yeah,
that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's actually a list of various different heliophysics packages that sort of want to adhere to similar standards. And again, going back to Craig's question the other day, is PyHC tries to be at least one source where a new user can go in and see and sort of get a sense of the wider heliophysics ecosystem of Python packages. So SunPy is part of that. A number of other packages, nothing to do with Solar, but nonetheless Helio, are involved in that. So
lost the page. Yeah, okay. And excuse my naivety here, but these kind of standards that you just sent around this heliophysics community, is this what SunPy follows?
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
Yeah.
We essentially wrote, I think most of those recommendations came from a lot of us in this meeting.
I recognize some names there.
Yeah.
Oh, this is interesting. Okay. Yeah, but this kind of information, I mean, luckily we haven't started writing code yet, but in our documents, as I said, we have said that we are going to follow certain standards. Maybe having this front and center on your affiliated package page saying we follow this might be useful. Maybe it is there, maybe I missed it.
that's a good point. If it wasn't obvious to you, then maybe we need to be aware of that.
Sure. And you were talking before about perhaps people don't have time to maintain their packages. I imagine time is the same as money. We've got money right now to produce our pipeline. We have a nominal 2-year, and we'll probably get a mission extension. Whether we can get funds in that mission extension for working on software, I don't know. So that's kind of something else which might kind of prevent somebody perhaps passing a future review, and I don't know how that can be. I don't know if you could have a section of SunPy for deprecated mission software which still may be of use but no longer conforms to the standards?
I think something that's come to my mind during this conversation is it's probably worth having a list aside from the affiliated package list of here's a list of mission-specific calibration code that we know exists in the open in Python, or even not, I guess. In the open, at least, here it is. It doesn't need to come with the same level of recommendation that the affiliated package thing is, but collecting, just having a list of, hey, look, all these missions have put their calibration software out in the open in version control, and you can raise issues against them and ask them questions about it.
Yeah. That could be good for you in terms of it's not your responsibility.
That's true.
I think just from a discoverability perspective, that's really important, and then may also help those instrument teams if they see that someone is pointing out things that need to be fixed or ways that it can be improved. I think that could be helpful to everyone.
I think as well, like this sort of stuff might be useful in the longer term, much longer term conversation of like funding for software for missions. The idea that you can write software once and then just leave it, and that's going to keep working and keep being up to date. Like we need to start informing the funding and the PIs. The PIs already know this, but like trying to, having a list of like, or having somewhere where we can say, well, listen, these packages are now outdated because they don't have any more money and they're not like on the shiny SunPy website. They're in the dark hole of other packages or something.
Sure.
Yeah.
And if the funding bodies disagree, you have to force them to kind of render a messy type contour plot on top of an image, which I know you guys are doing. You've got some software there now, but I tried doing that a couple of years ago. That was a nightmare. Their webpage, I believe, is still got flashing GIFs and things on it.
But yeah, it's from my point of view, I don't think this video package thing is not supposed to be, again, it's like a negative judgment. It's like, oh, look, Punch is terrible. Look, they haven't met these standards. I think it's more like a helpful for users. So if you want to put in the effort to make it work, to adhere to these standards, which ultimately is supposed to be about helping users have a more unified experience, then it's a way to publicize that. But especially for pipeline stuff, like there may be reasons you don't want to meet those standards. For analysis code, I can't think of reasons why you wouldn't, apart from time and money. But I don't think it should be a shaming thing. Like, oh, don't ever use Punch data because their software is terrible because it's not an affiliated package. Like that's not what it should be.
Well, it's I know what you're saying. It's like I had to go through the singular valular decomposition, and the ones which were available through NumPy and I forget the other package, they were too slow. So I just coded up my own one, which was because we're only using 2x2 matrices. There's actually a you can actually code up a faster version of this, and then I run it through Cython, and it was 3 times faster than the NumPy SVD or whatever it was. And so that's a good reason why we're using our own version of SVD, which has been produced somewhere else. There's a reason behind it. And I know that ROP Belgium, they produced a similar one for something else in the past, and my one's based upon that from work I did in the past. But there are some reasons for this. But from what I'm hearing from this discussion, it sounds like there's 2 avenues in, which is great, which is we will look at the pipeline. Maybe it's not appropriate to put it there, but then we just build this interface to the data. We know that our standard data products we know what they're going to be. We know we're going to be using level 0 and level 1 or level 0 and level 3, which are going to be released to SDAC and linked through VSO. And perhaps we just build the interface which goes into the SunPy affiliated package, and then maybe there's within the the header section, there's like a comment saying if you need to do something more special, go to our GitHub repository and run the software there. We'll get the software from there. But we will be talking with you guys whichever way it goes. You know, that's what we're going to be doing, and we'll make a decision later on where we're not. We've just got our first coder in, so coding is starting. But
it's also worth pointing out as a parallel here that the DKIST calibration codes, or at least the vast majority of it, will be open. But I have no intention of pushing that as an affiliated package.
Okay.
Unlike the user tools that I've been developing, which are designed for to allow the users to search our holdings and download the data and read them in and that stuff. That will be an affiliated package as soon as it has a release. So
sure. No, this conversation is enlightening. Thank you. Sorry, and I apologize if I'm hijacking stuff and if you need to move on, just say, and we... Because I'm also interested in the VSO and FIDO conversation as well.
I definitely think one of the things I wanted to have out of this conversation was a list of things we can improve about the webpage. So that's it. And the other thing we should really do is consider doing a re-review. That our re-reviews are due.
Yes.
Well, I've been writing down a bunch of things. So,
cool.
To be fair, I did make some slides, but I don't know.
Yeah, I was going to say on the schedule we have.
Yeah, I deliberately decided to let I thought this conversation was more important than me ranting about my slides.
No, I agree. I think this is exactly what we want. I think feedback from people who are gone through or want to go through, or especially from people developing instrument-specific software. I think that's exactly what we want out of this conversation for sure.
Yeah, because we've got a. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Nabil.
I was going to say we've got there's 2 open issues about improvements that we can make. I've made a link to that. I'll add a bunch of them to that. I think the webpage probably needs tidying up, splitting up. I guess the question so I was going to bring up some of the points that you did at the end of your slide, David. Will. But I guess my last question on my slide was: do we actually want to grow the ecosystem right now? And that seems kind of counterproductive, but we don't have a liaison at the moment. Who here has time to review all of the affiliated packages if we do decide to actually do the yearly review? And it's like we could try and push this, but then we potentially let it collapse under its own weight without the support. And that is, I guess, a slight worry that I have as well. And obviously that means time and money, but yeah.
Well, I mean, there are 2 things there that I think are interesting, right? We tried a bit to push this with other instrument teams and get conversations with instrument teams going a while ago, and that effort pretty much fizzled due to lack of time. We haven't done any of the re-reviews due to lack of time, and we don't. So I think at the moment we are relatively, it is a relatively unmaintained corner of the project. And I don't know how to go about fixing that.
As Albert pointed out, the Rose's proposal may, or if funded, will go a long way towards doing that.
I asked this question yesterday, I think it was. Have any of you guys actually gone and talked to the guys who built the SolarSoft? Because there will come a point where you do have enough packages or instruments associated with SunPy that any future missions will want to have their mission associated with SunPy. And I don't know at what point that happened with SolarSoft. I don't know at what point individual instruments kind of said, "Oh shit, we need to really, get our software in SolarSoft."
I mean, I think it was all just soft money, and Sam Freeland made the scripts and the packages to distribute binaries and text files, I mean, that's what he did. And then all of the instrument teams just started putting stuff in to SolarSoft. I mean, yeah. As far as I understand it, it's all been soft money from the missions that, you know, they have some money, they know they need to do it, but it's not specific. Like, yeah. Unfortunately, there isn't often, you know, a software development budget in the mission budgets. There should be, but it should be very large, but I don't think it's been there in the past, at least.
And I haven't used SSW for a long time now. It's been several years. Are there conflicts in there? Do they have standards or not?
No. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just a very, very different way of developing things. I mean, basically, you need to know one of the gatekeepers to get the files into SSW, and once they're in there, that's kind of it. They just get replicated out, and if something breaks, then, you know, you need to email someone who knows someone, and they tell someone to fix it. Usually, like Dominic, or in the past, Richard Swartz or someone.
Excellent.
But I mean, like, there's lots of the functions that have the exact same name, and you, depending on what way you've loaded up your tree, you'll get different ones.
Yeah, I do remember that. But maybe that speaks towards having, I don't say you want to reduce your standards, but not making them too restrictive. As we've discussed a couple of times, perhaps people don't have the time or the money to really format it exactly how you want. So you have to kind of meet them halfway, perhaps, and make it a little bit easier for them to get their software in there while still remaining the SunPy integrity.
Or the expertise, actually. You know, not all of us are up to speed on how to program in a SunPy conform way. And that might be in holding people back from submitting things.
That's a fair comment to hear, because we don't think that, you know, we're stopping that, because I think we just want people to get in contact with us and learn. But, you know, when you're on the other side, it's, you know, we appreciate it can look more intimidating, you know, if it's unfamiliar and you think you might be judged. So that's a fair comment from a different point of view.
I mean, I can only speak for myself, and for me, it's certainly true. I mean, I'm an IDL convert, and I now exclusively program in Python, but I know I'm not like nearly at the level as you are or will. So that's what's kind of had me holding back submitting things to SunPy.
But I mean, I don't think that there's like, I don't think SunPy cares so much like how you program. I mean, the standards aren't about, oh, you didn't use this cool single dispatch thing in Python. It's more that you have tests and documentation, and the function, you know, it kind of has, you know, variables that make sense and names that make sense and things like that. So I mean, maybe we need to be more, advertise that more or something. That there isn't, like, there's not a, you know, a software standard in the sense of, you know, it must be done in the most Pythonic, excellent way.
Oh, I wouldn't say there's no standard, but we will absolutely work with people to fix egregious issues in the internals. It's not.
It also depends, like, it also depends what you mean by contributing in this sense, right? Because if you contribute a pull request to SunPy core or one of the other sponsored packages, as Danny will attest, there is fewer better ways to learn how to program Python. We will hopefully like be very helpful and constructive and help you fit in with both our like style guidelines and also just give you the benefit of experience in, have you considered doing this way instead because of these reasons. If you're writing your own package and you want it to be affiliated, we're not going to do a code review. Like, we'll look at the code to see whether it conforms to the standards, but the standards are things like, are you re-implementing stuff that already exists? Have you got tests? Have you got documentation? It's not, is your code PEP 8 compliant and, you know, perfectly formed unicorn code, right? We're not going to do a code review on an affiliated package in the same way that we are in a pull request to one of the packages we maintain.
Yep, and that's understood, and I'm promising to be better about it in the future. I mean, for me, it's the latter. It's a instrument affiliated package, and basically just trying to learn the ropes. Like, should I do it through SunKit Image, or should I do my own SunPy, or what should I do? And it became clear very quickly that I'm not up to speed on like how to do my own SunPy. So that's why I was going more the SunKit Image route, and I didn't want to kind of imply that you're judgmental about code. I mean, in the on the contrary, actually, I mean, the website also makes it very clear we want your contributions, and don't be ashamed, and please contribute, and we all need this software. And it was trying to find an explanation as to why people have been hesitant to submit things.
I think that's something we should take on board and just be sensitive to, because we do bang on about standards so much that, you know, people who just hear us once a year at a conference, it's not unreasonable to see how people could be like, oh my God, their standards, they're always on about that. They must be very high. I can't do that.
You will get critical mass at one point, and then you can impose your standards. That's what will happen. Yeah.
Well, I think what we want ultimately is to get to a critical point where people see the benefit of them, and they're not like, oh, in order to get into this club, I see all these other benefits, but in order to get those benefits, I have to pay the membership, which is these standards. Hopefully we get to a point where people see it's great having doc strings that are well written. So when I go back to the function in a year's time, even I can remember what I did, you know, like, or how it works, you know. So hopefully we get to that point. I mean, I would, as just back up to what Stuart said, my experience, there's no better way to learn than to dive in at the deep end and go through a gauntlet of code review and, you know, realize that you know far less than you thought you did. But, you know, it's a great way to learn fast and to progress. But it can be scary. It takes a certain amount of confidence, or just not giving a damn what other people think, or what you think about what other people think. But
just echoing that, Danny, like it's like that thing, especially when you're coming from a researcher side and you write code for your own analysis. And you're like, well, I'm not a software developer. I don't know how to contribute. And like for my whole PhD, I was using SunPy and finding bugs and just never contributed. And then it was really when I started working with you, more so sitting at the desk and you're like, open an issue or raise it, like, you know, contribute code, and you're like, oh, it's actually just that simple. You can just do that, and then you can walk through it step by step. I think the key thing there was knowing you and having, not being handheld, but almost being handheld. And maybe this is something we need to kind of consider, is having like a newcomer's liaison of, like, you know, hand holding. Oh, you do this cool thing. You want to contribute. This is how you get this. Everyone can do it, and you learn by starting small. But it is intimidating. But now that you're in it, you're like, no, it's not. But it, like,
right.
It's hard to kind of cross that barrier. For sure.
Agreed. In terms of, just from my personal experience, in terms of what could be improved to kind of encourage people to submit, is maybe the visibility of SunKit instruments could be a little bit better. I mean, I personally found it by accident, like looking through the SunPy documentation, and I don't know kind of necessarily the route you could go there. I don't know, maybe a Solar News announcement or something like that. But just for me personally, I kind of found it by accident.
That's good to know. I mean, it's less than a year old, right? It came out of the last coordination meeting, and so in that sense, it's fairly new. So,
well, in terms of like distance from first proper release, it's sub 6 months, I think. So
yeah,
it's also been hidden in the haze of COVID as well, like many things.
Until Chris just brought it up, I had no idea what it was. So I'm looking at it now.
I was actually going to say, I mean, is this? I think at some point in this the schedule, we were supposed to talk about candidate affiliated packages. I wanted to mention something about SunExpex, but I noticed, like, on one of the slides that SunKit Instruments wasn't listed. Surely that should be aspiring to be an affiliated or sponsored package. It's basically pulling out bits of core.
It hasn't gone through the review I think that's, but it's
now it has a release. We should do that actually. I think
Yeah.
that's what we were holding off for, but we've done that.
It should probably be
So
sponsored, not just
we are
affiliated
so
as well.
short on time. We haven't even run our own packages through our own process yet.
great.
Good.
Just
Somebody open that issue for me, please.
yeah, I will have a look at that. So we're 5 minutes into it. So if people do want to go for another 25-minute break, and we'll come back at half hour, or we can carry. If people do want to carry on talking through it, I won't prevent you.
I just wanted to quickly say, and I can say this in 30 seconds, just about sun specs for solar X-ray spectroscopy. Just to let people know that a couple of weeks ago we had like a re-kickoff meeting when Shane and Laura were there. Chris Cooper, who's a student at Glasgow, as well as Ian Hanna and myself were there, and so just let people know that there's a small effort sort of trying to get that going again. Its relationship to StixPy, is sort of a good motivator, and that package is there to provide like physics-based models or functions that are useful in that kind of analysis. And so we discovered that we have functions that actually do work and can be used for analysis. I think Bin Chen actually already used them in a paper. That's exactly what I was about to say. Yeah, yeah. So and that was actually a new discovery for us as part of that meeting. But that's exciting. But it is not yet released. But we're going to work towards a 0.1 release. And I think SunXpex, once it does have a release, I think should be a candidate for, if not sponsored, then hopefully affiliated package. So that's something that's coming down the line. It's not ready for that yet, by any means. There's chronically little documentation at the moment, for example. But I think it should be an aspiration for us to get there.
Sounds good.
Apart from that, I'm good to take a break.
Yeah, I was going to say, should we call it for a break?
Sure. Thanks for the discussion, guys. It was really interesting.
What time are we meeting in 20 minutes? Or 25 or what?
Keep it half
supposed to be back at 1:30, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I can't see the Fido talk being that controversial.
Well, we've got the VSO people coming. Let's at least start it on time.
Sure. Yeah, fair point. 20 minutes it is.
Okay. See you in 20.
See you soon.
We have an Ed and an Alistair. We have an Ed and an Alistair. Hey, Stuart. Hey. We have an Ed and an Alistair. Echoing. Hey, Stuart. Hey.
That's interesting.
Why?
That is interesting.
We have an Ed and an Alistair. Oh my God, stop.
Stop
Is
saying
that
that.
the stream echoing from somewhere?
That's it bouncing of something a long way off.
We have an Ed and an Alistair. Oh, stop.
Stop saying
The
that.
stream echoing from somewhere?
It's the start of a remix. That's it bouncing of something a long way off.
All right, I have forcibly muted everybody. Let's see whether that fixes it.
So I just want to thank everyone back for the second half of today's SunPy coordination meeting, and the topic of today. Well, the first half will be talking about Fido, and then if we have time left over, we will be talking about time series. No takers or moderators. I think Shane, you're going to be arguing today, so you don't want to take notes.
I like my hands free when I argue, so yeah.
So if someone else would like to take notes, that'd be
I can
much
volunteer.
appreciated.
If someone throws up the link again for me, just so.
Where are we?
Can make it easy.
I will need to share my screen. Oh, I need to actually bump Jitsi out into a separate window, otherwise that is going to be recursive. And there we are. I assume everyone can see my screen, hopefully.
Yeah.
So I guess the goal of this session is to discuss the state of our FIDO clients and where we put them, when do we write them, why do we write them, with input from the VSO people.
When don't we write them?
All that as well. So I'm just going to quickly recap what FIDO is, just to bring everyone to speed, and the clients that we have currently in core and elsewhere. Oh, that is some lag. So if people who aren't aware, FIDO is our unified data fetcher and searcher system. I always forget why FIDO was named FIDO, but it was named FIDO. And basically, it allows us to have a unified API that will search and retrieve data from various clients that will interface with APIs externally. So obviously, for example, we have a VSO client and a JSON client, and they, well, so actually not true. The JSON client obviously calls through DRMS to make queries for SDO data and MDMI data. And obviously our VSO client is a direct call to their SOAP API. And then we have a bunch of other clients, which are essentially what we call generic clients, which take a URL and then we DDoS a server to fetch you all the relevant files that you were after. And we kind of, well, we definitely are rate limited sometimes by some of these servers. And obviously we have a whole bunch of them in core from, I think, years ago now. I don't know. Do you know how old the clients were, Stuart? No.
Which ones?
What's our oldest client? Was it the VSO first?
The VSO client dates back close to the beginning. I'm pretty sure the VSO client was in the 01 release.
And as time is going, we've added more and more clients, and we have the names I've listed. I'm not going to go through them because I don't think it's necessarily relevant, but this is brought to a point where we have refactored FIDO to a point where you can inherit. Yeah, you do inherit. You inherit the generic client, don't you? You inherit, yeah. You still class it. To a point where it allows other people to write clients that aren't necessarily in core. Before, all the clients had to be in core. Now they can be anywhere, and then you just inherit from SunPy. SunPy's data retriever client. Oh, not retriever, the generic client. And you can, for example, we have clients now in Radio Spectra that Shane has been lovingly writing. Obviously, Stuart has been writing the DKISS client, which are in the user tools. I'm not sure if I'm missing any. I think David wrote some for PFS, not a PFS, the
I have a Solar Orbiter client.
That's the one.
Solar Orbiter archive.
How could I forget Solar Orbiter? And so, obviously, we now allow the community to write the clients using our infrastructure. But the problem has become well, that's not really a word. The issue that has cropped up is that as the VSO has expanded, some of our clients now return repeat data from the VSO. So we are now overlapping with VSO results in a way that might be unnecessary. For example, if if someone comes to us and goes, they have two sets of results, one from say our Eve client and one from say the VSO client, we can't tell them what the difference is. No one has sat down with our clients to work out which one should you use? Which one should a normal person who has come to us, who a normal person who's doing research, which one should they use? Should they use the VSO? Obviously, if someone were to ask me, I would just go, ignore our client and use the VSO. And I think that would be, I guess, we could argue the most default advice we could give to people in this case for this problem. So we've got a bunch of problems trying solutions, but I'm going to walk through them one by one. So obviously, I think in Shane's case for radio spectra, I forget what client it was that also returns VSO data.
I think it's waves, stereo S waves.
And so obviously, if you were now, so obviously when I think in our last release of Radio Spectra, that client came out. So if you were to import that client, or you were to do a FIDO search and you had time series. For time series, why am I getting? Okay. You have Radio Spectra installed. FIDO will automatically pick up the registration and would give you dual results, and that obviously then allows you to download both if you wanted to.
I think you'd have to import.
You have to import it. I thought FIDO.
Yeah, I think you have to import it.
Yeah.
I thought FIDO. I thought we used init subclass. So as soon as the subclass was initialized.
As soon as the subclass is imported.
Imported, yeah.
Oh, is it import? It's not okay. Well, maybe
it's as soon as the. It's as soon as the. It's as soon as the interpreter has seen it. Right. So you have to import it. We could consider using something like setup tools entry points to auto import things.
I'm thinking of the Atlas registry, aren't I?
Well, it's the same thing. It still happens at past time.
Okay, so maybe I've just talked myself out of a problem here. It's not really. Okay,
what was the problem?
Well, overlapping with VSO results. So obviously we have two clients. We have a custom SunPy client that returns results that should be similar to the VSO. Problem number one. Problem number two is that if we write a custom client, and this happened with the SRS client, and the data upstream changes on the URL, they come to us because obviously we are serving them that data, and we don't have the contacts to fix those kind of problems. That happened with the SRS client, and obviously we actually had to change the URL for the SRS client completely because they deprecated the old URL, and we didn't find out until Monica came to us with a problem when she was searching for some data. And then we found out that we were serving out of date and potentially uncalibrated or uncorrected data. So I'm arguing from a point of view that we should probably be looking at our custom clients in core and moving them out. Whether that means a SunKit.
So you, with the goal of them being opt-in, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
Could you say that when you say opt-in, what do you mean?
You would have to import them to enable them.
So I made the assumption that, sorry, it's actually only for core because we actually do import all of them to namespace, is that in SunPy we import all of our subclients and that registers them, which means you can potentially get repeat results. But obviously if we were to move them out of core, you would have to specifically import a client to get that result, to get those results through FIDO.
We don't have to move them out of core to achieve that. We can just not import them by default.
True. We wouldn't have to maintain them though if they weren't in core. Well,
I mean, we do. Somebody still has to maintain them. So
yeah, but maybe it'd be better to. Yeah, I don't know. I wish Steve was here because I'm kind of agreeing to his original. So I don't know people who are aware that Steve initially thought about moving Fido completely out of core. But Fido would be its own package that anyone could use to write clients for any kind of data. And I'm halfway agreeing with Steve, except that I think we should move some of our clients out of core, leaving the JSOC and VSO clients in core. So that would be our default.
That seems kind of half like. I feel like there's a good case for making Fido its own package because it can be useful potentially beyond SunPy in the greater heliophysics realm. But if you're just moving clients out, aren't you just moving the same problem to a different space and just creating packages out of sub-packages? I mean, if Fido is still in core, isn't one of the fundamental points of SunPy core is data access, right? That's why map reads files, as opposed to saying, oh, you have to import AIA to read an AIA file. Like, so isn't this kind of at the core of what SunPy should be if Fido is in core?
Yeah, I haven't thought this through, have I? So,
so if we moved Fido out of core, I would still argue that VSO and JSOC should live in SunPy because they're solar physics specific.
Yeah.
So I guess kind of it.
Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, I guess the root of the issue is that VSO serves a lot of data sources, but doesn't serve all of them. So there are instances where someone wants data that the VSO doesn't support yet, but that means we have to write a client to go directly to that source. Then VSO might add support. So I'm thinking of Solar Orbiter here, really. VSO might add support in the future. And so I guess the danger is that we become source of light. We build the VSO ourselves in SunPy with lots of different clients, when that is just duplicating effort the VSO does in putting all these data sources in one interface.
In developing the Punch SOC, we are actually going to be making sure that VSO distributes the Punch data. Will that automatically get forwarded on to SunPy? And perhaps you can recommend future developers to go down a similar route so it avoids duplication.
Are you exclusively having it distributed through VSO?
We're going to have SDAC will be our primary data repository. We're going to have a local data repository, but we're going to use VSO, and the link, they're going to link to, I guess, SDAC or our database. So exclusive, I don't know what else is available, but at this moment, I guess, yes.
Well, I mean, as opposed to having your own API that you run.
No, apart from having access through the web page, I don't think we're going to produce any code for accessing the data through our own repository or SDAC. That may change, of course.
Fair enough. So I think one of the problems we've encountered in the past, which we can use as a jumping point, but there are other examples of this, is the Suvi client we have in core was written relatively soon after the Suvi data was made available in FIT. Steve and some other people wrote it, and it scraped the level 1 and level 2 Suvi files. And it works. It gets rate limited occasionally, but it handles it. And 6 months or so later, however long it was, VSO started serving some SUVI data, level 2, I think, level 1. Okay, level 1 data. I knew it was one of the two, couldn't remember which one. And if you now do a SUVI level 1 search through Fido, you get both. And the results are different. And we can't tell you why.
I'm working on the SUVI team, and I can't tell you why either. That's just the nature of the SUVI data. I think there's just so many data sources that it's hard to keep track of.
Chris, have you reprocessed recently?
No.
Okay.
So, Stuart, can I just chip in? That brings up
Go
another point, is that, for example, when we talked initially with Dan Seaton about this, we were explicitly asked not to serve the level 2 data because it wasn't regarded as being a product of suitable scientific quality. And so that is why we will only serve the level 1 data as until they do a reprocessing or say that the level 2 data is suitable for serving.
Which brings up an interesting point, because we have not had that conversation with anybody, because we didn't ask anybody primarily. So we didn't know that, right?
Yeah,
which is something that VSO does and we don't.
So, I mean, specifically, there are ways that we have been asked to query specific data providers, like, there's a specific API for cancel HOA data that we use. Ed is busy writing the TAP sort of like interface for VSO so that we can talk to various e-submissions but that's the way that they actually want us to do it. So, we do try and actually talk to the data providers. So when we have a problem, we nearly always have somebody that we can talk to about issues that we're seeing.
So I guess then from the SunPy side, unless people are going to disagree with this statement, like that is obviously a service the VSO provides on top of the actual technological infrastructure they have. They provide the service of actually working with the data providers to get this data, all the different sources of data indexed. Which makes me think we should drop the SUVI client completely, as an example, and extend that to, unless the VSO turn around and go, we're not going to index that because of X, Y, and Z, we don't put a Fido client for it in core.
But what if I want level 2 SUVI data? And I know it's not okay to use, but I want it because I want to do my little niche thing. And now you're saying that SunPy won't give it to me, but maybe I can get it in SSW. I don't know if I can now, but I mean, I'm just being the devil's advocate here.
Yeah, like building on that, Shane, like, I mean, the way the clients are written, we have notes with them and saying, like, if you're using this data, this is where it comes from, and read this README file from the data source. So it's really up to we're putting it in the user's hands to be like.
But when you use Fido, you're using it completely blind to all of the documentation. You just say, I want SUVI data at these dates. And it just gives you a list of files with no context as to where those files have come from or what quality they are.
That's true.
Yeah, there is the point also. I mean, that all that data you can go and find on the web. You can search all their the site. But for some of the other people, we were asked not to spider their site, for example. But I've known that other people have actually gone and spidered their site. So we're trying to be responsive to both what the community wants in the terms of, hey, I want this data regardless, but also to the data providers in that they're saying, hey, please don't do this to us. So we don't. And that may mean that you have to go to their site and download the level 2 files individually, or if somebody scraped it for you, then you're all right, I guess. But when we're asked specifically not to do these things, then we try to play nice with the data providers.
I mean, that's completely fair enough. And I mean, I suppose what I don't understand is if they don't want their level 2 data out there, then don't put it on a web accessible server, and then you have no problem anywhere ever. But that's probably not practical, in certain cases.
Well,
Nobody has ever come to us and asked us to delete a client
sure.
yet.
I would also say that it's kind of risky saying don't put it out there, because SUVI is kind of like a special case where it's built to be an operational mission, and as scientists we want to use that data, but let's not tell them to go and hide that data. Because they could do it. I'm not sure what their science funding is now, but it's primarily being used for space weather operations.
To some extent, though, if you put a web server on the internet, you have to accept the fact that somebody might crawl it, or you have to explicitly put technological things in place to do it. And obviously, if the SUVI team came to us and said, "Please stop this," then we would obviously probably do something about that. We'd work with them on coming to a solution.
Yeah, you might also find that NOAA, being a US government institute, might block your attempts to spider it or something in the future, if they wish to.
They don't come from us. We're not doing it as a service on the web.
Okay.
The client does it from the machine that you run the code from. So,
okay.
But I mean, so with the SUVI client, if we can get the data through the VSO, then I don't necessarily think dropping the SUVI client is a big thing. However, it would be nice to keep it around for the times when the VSO is down or we can't get to it, so that if it was in SunPy clients or something, that if someone wants to go and do something, they could. But the default standard clients or whatever, VSO, DRMS, and whatever else we can't get from VSO. I'm not pro having millions of clients. It's just too hard.
I think that's what it used to do, right? It tried to do VSO, and if there wasn't any VSO, it went looking for the clients. Whereas now, no?
It used to do it the other way around.
Oh, the other way around, yeah. Because RESI, another example is RESI at the moment, right? You search your RESI data, it provides you results of 2 clients, one from the VSO and one from our client, and they're 2 different forms of data. And so the form that we have in our client isn't available through the VSO.
Or the summaries, or the
the observing summary.
What Fido used to do, I can't remember what version we changed this. It might have been 2.1 or it might have been earlier. I think it was earlier. What it used to do was if a client that wasn't the VSO returned results, it wouldn't search the VSO.
Yeah. Okay.
But now it searches all the clients that say, "Hey, I know how to handle that query," and returns all the results. It seems like then that there's vague agreement that clients that are duplicated from VSO should probably be shuffled out of core, or at the very least disabled by default.
Yeah.
Do we know what that list is?
Could they move to the SunPy Instra? I don't know.
I'd be pro that. I think having clients like that in instrument-specific code is a sensible place for them.
And only for ones that have already data available with the VSO, and keep the ones there that don't, say, right?
Well, okay, so that's an interesting question, right? Where do we draw this line?
And if you put it into instruments, I think there would have to be some sort of way of making sure that the syntax stays the same. I mean, within reasonable instrument-specific bounds, but you don't want to learn a new syntax for FIDO for each instrument.
Yeah, that actually brings up a very interesting question that I've started to come across when I was doing the radio spectre clients. Is that we have a.instrument or adders.instrument, adders.detector, and a few other things. And in radio spectra, like they mean a specific thing. Like an instrument is the instrument that detected it and stuff like that. But I'm not sure if that carries across to like the client that the SOAR client that David implemented, and I'm not sure if that matches with the client, the normal FIDO clients. So it's about how we kind of maintain some semblance of standard across what are different packages, but using the same FIDO search terminology, I guess.
That data model question is an interesting one that I don't have a good answer to. And Danny's mouth is moving, but he's muted.
Yeah, I was just going to clarify. Shane, are you saying that tags that mean something in radio mean something different elsewhere?
No.
Sorry.
No. I just mean, so like, for example, please, someone from the VSO correct me if I'm wrong here, but sometimes when you query the VSO, if you do like a detector equals, I don't know, stereo, and there's no results, in the background, they'll actually switch it up to be like a.instrument equals stereo so that you get some results. But in the radio client, it will not do that. Like if you give it an incorrect query, you get 0 results because like, yeah. And so that's kind of the thing I mean.
I mean, that's kind of the advantage we have of dealing with Solar data. We have some idea of what you probably meant. And we do try to do some things in the background to give you, answers we think that you might want.
Yeah, I suppose that makes it difficult to write like a data model, as Stuart said, that has semantic meaning to certain terms. Like, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
I mean, a lot of the FIDO data model and API is based off the VSO data model, right? Because the VSO client came first, and everything we have done since we have tried to fit into the VSO data model.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I did have what you're describing, Shane. I came across that when I was writing the SunPy SOAR client, and the way you query the Solar Orbiter archive does not really fit in with the SunPy. With the VSO data model. So actually, one reason for putting the SOAR client outside of SunPy is that once Solar Orbiter data is indexed by VSO, I expect the data model for querying it will be different. So actually, to extend what you said earlier, Stuart, I would suggest that we don't put clients in Chord that are served by VSO or are planned to be served by VSO.
I'm muted, aren't I? Can you bring up the slide with all the clients on it, Nabil?
Give me a sec. Where are we? So probably quicker to print the FIDO docstring. There we are. So
VSO, JSOC, HEK, and HEC clients would all stay. Eve returns level 0 ECS data that is not served by the VSO. As far as I'm aware, GBM is not served by the VSO.
I don't think so.
Gong data will be. Is.
Is to some degree, will be. There's just it's sort of like in the stages of about to undergo a complete rewrite. So
that could go. That's on the chopping block. XRS.
it's on the list,
So,
but I couldn't tell you how soon that will get in.
yeah. This is like the interesting question about doing this, right? Is the VSO are somewhat run off their feet at all times, it seems like. And yeah, do we wait? How long do we wait for stuff? Is why, say, the Suvi client came into existence. So XRS could go. Lyra?
That will be in there. Ed is working on the TAP stuff to interface with ESA. So once that is done, then Lyra will probably be added. We only serve swap from there at the moment.
So that could go. Interseason predictor, their own weird and wonderful little thing.
And they're very specific in that one file on a web server, if I recall.
Yeah, it's a single JSON file that lives somewhere.
So whether or not that should even be a client.
It's a bit overkill that it's a Fido client, really, but there we are. I can't even remember what Nora is.
It's the Russian radio spectrograph.
Noviana. Yeah.
That's the one.
Is that in the VSO?
No, it's on the list, but it's been on the list for a very long time.
Yeah, like
So that's never likely to be in the VSO.
It's not a priority at the moment.
Resi, as we said, does something different that isn't indexed by the VSO. SRS is not in the VSO and is weird and wonderful.
And they've currently stopped updating it as well, so there you go.
And just as we've fixed it, and Suvi, we have already discussed. So we will be talking about what pulling at minimum
4.
Gong, XRS,
Suvi,
Lyra, Suvi, and potentially the radio heliograph as well.
You could, we will be doing a client for DKIST as well, but you may want to keep that because of the integration with the user tools.
That already exists in the user tools, and it will be staying in the user tools, so it's already outside of core.
Yeah.
So again, it's opt-in.
So from a pragmatic point of view, is it worth having a namespace that contains clients that VSO doesn't serve but will in the future, which is not enabled by default, but like with a health warning, users can import it and use it?
I mean, stopping and thinking about this for a little while does bring questions about, like, this from a user perspective. Are people going to be able to find these clients if we put them somewhere else? How are we going to document where they exist and how you use them? Is this actually something like, yes, having Fido return Suvi results from the Suvi client and the VSO client without any prompting, for example, again, I'm just picking on Suvi here, but it applies to other things as well, is confusing. but at least it is to some extent in your face. Is it more or less user hostile to not have it return the results at all and tell you that you have to go and like discover the fact that there's this magic import that you can do that makes it return more super results?
Considering people can't find a lot of stuff now, I don't know if they'll be able to find more stuff. But I have a question that's kind of adjacent to this, because like one of the goals for this was to decide like when should a new client be written and accepted, and so like if someone was to go and write a nice, beautiful, pretty client that interfaces with the ESA servers and can provide maybe slightly different search functionality to what VSO can, because they have different background data models, like would we not take that? Or would that, because it would return the same and possibly different data? Yeah, I mean, like that's what I'm trying to get back to is like when should we accept a client and when should we not, or like what are the requirements?
Surely it's the way that gives you the least amount of work to do. And I don't mean that in a flippant way.
I don't just don't accept it ever. Just go.
Well, I mean, that's why my half-assed idea. That's why I like my half-assed idea. It's like, okay, we have VSO and JSOC in core because they obviously provide the best two sources of Solr data, and then everything else we just shuttle off somewhere else. And then we don't need to worry about what goes in core because we're only going to serve, I guess, what you call multi-purpose clients, which are what the VSO and JSOC are. They're not. Everything else is like essentially one instrument with one level and everything. While the VSO and the JSOC provide a wider spectrum.
Isn't the point of FIDO to be like, one sort of entry point, to sort of sweep up all possible like data sources? If it's just VSO or JSOC, is there a point of even having FIDO? Just search VSO or search JSOC? Use the clients directly?
That's a really good point.
I would rather use FIDO than, well, I don't know, yeah, I'm used to it. And I think actually being able to search and download data from JSOC and VSO just in itself is, with one interface, is actually really useful. Especially with JSOC, every time I go to their web page, I'm bamboozled with what I should do to get the data I want.
I'm not suggesting you shouldn't be able to. You should have to go to the website and do it manually. I'm just saying, why not just have two objects, VSO and like VSO FIDO and VSO and JSOC FIDO or something? I mean, obviously that you wouldn't name them that, but I mean, isn't the point that there are all these different data sources? It's a pain to know about them all and then to use them all. And the thing about FIDO is that it gives you back everything that's out there, and then you can, then you have discoverability of data. You've you've got like in one place, and then the user can decide which ones to fetch. And if they don't know,
that's a good point, Danny. Like discoverability of all these clients is one thing. Like if you don't know that you can get it from different places, or if you don't even know that you can get it in the first place.
I mean, this comes back to. Sorry, go ahead, Shane.
No.
It's because this just comes back to, is one of the main points of SunPy core about data access. If it is, then this does seem like, this seems completely within scope of having, clients for all the weird and wonderful, sources, so long as there's someone willing to maintain it.
So the issue here isn't, I mean, we've refactored all our clients and maintaining them now is fairly trivial. The issue, I guess my point of view is that what do we view our responsibility to users that use Fido. Is that if you were to go sous vide data and you have the issue where you accidentally download from the sous vide client instead of the VSO by mistake, and you process all this data that for whatever reason it turns out to be wrong or the wrong level and you didn't realize. Obviously that's a user error partly, but it's also on us because we are providing direct access to this data that if you'd say gone through the VSO would have been fine.
Does Fido not tell you what the data sources are? Like, do you get like a hit back saying sous vide data from VSO and sous vide data from sous vide client?
It tells you what client returned the results.
Right.
So it will tell you VSO client or sous vide client, but that is it. That's not very meaningful unless you already know. Like, unless you're already in the know, that doesn't help you very much.
Is the point of Fido then, or of these clients, is to like come up with the one data source to rule them all, sort of thing. Like we will like relieve users of the responsibility of knowing about the data from the instrument, and all you have to know is how to use Fido, and we promise that we will give you what you want, and you don't ever have to worry about talking to instrument teams or knowing about the nuances of different levels. Is that our job? If there's a way of getting the data, isn't Fido's point or these clients' point is to give you an opportunity to get the data? Maybe you have, I don't know, ways of defining your preferences for which client you take. But
well, with the,
I don't know.
Sorry, go on, Shane.
I was just going to say, sometimes even the providers don't give you the right data. I know that there was an issue with MDI data where I can't remember where it was being served from. I just don't remember right now. Maybe it was SDAC. And like the data was just wrong. It was outdated. And they were serving it up for ages. And like it was like genuinely wrong. So like that happens even with data providers. Sometimes mistakes happen. You can't ever guarantee that what you think is correct comes down the pipe.
If it was shipped out to something like some instruments or something, I mean, how would that look? Is it just that you'd have to then import Sunkit instruments and then it would work the same? And maybe that makes sense for those instruments specific, like Lyra client. Like, that's, if you want something more niche that has its own caveats associated with it, you need to go and use Sunkit instrument. And that will kind of open the door to allowing kind of more weird and wonderful clients being added, because that's okay to live in that instrument specific package. But it would still work the same for a user. They just would have to import it, and then they'd have the awareness that they're not getting it from the VSO or from JSON.
So hang on. So how does that work? So like you import Sunkit instruments and then you call Fido, and then it just. So isn't that's also pretty confusing, right? Because what if you import Sunkit instruments for a different thing, and all of a sudden there's this other client that you didn't know about?
Well, you could move. You could make. That's up to how you lay out the Sunkit instruments tree, right? If Sunkit instruments tops level dunder init file imports the client or triggers an import of the client, it will be registered with Fido. If the user has to do from Sunkit instruments.lyra.fido client import Lyra or like import Sunkit instruments.lyra.fido client, then that's what the user has to import to register it with Fido.
Yeah, it just seemed very opaque and very like sometimes but you could end up with a situation that the Lyra one gets imported by default, and another one doesn't, and you can say that's the responsibility of the Sunkit instruments maintainers. But from a user's point of view, suddenly maintainers are making decisions for them regarding something that they believe they're using directly from core.
But like another example, I agree with you, Danny. But just like say for example, like why is then S waves? Like if you want S wave data, why is that in radio spectra? I don't even know what my point is here. I'm just rambling.
Well, I mean,
It doesn't really need to be because VSO now gives S-Wave data.
Yeah,
It
okay,
didn't when I
yeah.
started to write it, but it does now. So again,
Yeah.
this is one of those timing things.
Yeah.
I guess the way I see it is that it's confusing from a user's point of view. If in order to get Lyra data, I need to import Sunken Instruments, then why don't I have to import AIA-Py to get AIA data? Like, what's the point of SunPy core? If
there isn't an AIA data provider. There's JSOC, and that's in core because it's JSOC.
Then at that
Putting
point,
a JSOC client in AIA-Py would make no sense.
Sure, no, I get that, but my point, my angle is from like a user's point of view. Well, no, it's not a bad example from the point of view of a user, in the sense that like you have to then you've gone to Fido, right? You haven't gone to like VSO client. You haven't gone like import VSO. I want to use a VSO and know that it's like or JSOC or whatever, and know that I'm using the specific, data repository or data server. It's like you then basically have to know how the code is structured in order to like make this correct decision. So you're requiring the users to know about the code base in a way that may not be necessary.
But like, say for example, Danny, like on that point, like say I build a new instrument and I build a SunPy affiliated package and I have my own Fido client for getting, let's say I have a super AIA and I have
Dekist. You can use Dekist as an example because it's literally happened.
Yeah, right. So then you can Dekist Pi or whatever is its own affiliated package, and you would, to get Dekist data, you would have to import that package, and you'd use Fido to do that. And the way you would do it here is you're putting the Lyra client and the like Nobiyama client into Instrument is because they're too small to have their own little package. If you think about it that way. And if we could convey that to the users, that you say, in core, we only do VSO JSOC, the general ones. But if you want the more instrument specific ones, and that kind of builds on the model of, say, having affiliated packages and moving things out of SunPy for a specific work. But it's, again, you have to teach the users that. And that's how the structure of SunPy is.
To me, from a user experience, it seems to reduce the power or like usefulness of Fido, because effectively what you're saying is you have to go and know and like import, put in a line in where you have to like explicitly deal with the fact that this client, why don't I just use the client directly, if I want that.
But you're still using the client. You're just using, it still works the same way. It's just you have to make sure you have the right things imported. It'd be the same way you'd need to have your, your packages in your IDL setup.
Right, but again, if I'm doing Lyra, why would I ever want to? If I know that I want Lyra data and I need it from this Lyra instrument package, why would I ever want to use Fido? Because I have to know about this.
You can search your Lyra data. Well, many things. One, it's the same interface. It behaves the same as all the other things that you might be using for different projects. Two, you can search your Lyra data and your AIA data from the VSO at the same time. If you want to do co-aligned observations, you can use Fido to search multiple sources at the same time that don't have to be in the same package. You can search your Lyra data, your AIA data, and your Dekist data all at the same time from one line in your Fido search.
So why didn't you include Dekist client in SunPy core?
So to some extent, because I wanted to prove the point that I could have a Fido client that wasn't in core, because it was the first one when I wrote it. Secondly, because I expect VSO to index it. And thirdly, because you could respond to that question with why isn't the entirety of the Dekist user tools in core?
Well, I think searching for data and loading data, like we have map sources in core. I think searching for and loading data is different.
You said that while Albert wasn't here. Good work. But I mean, the thing is that the Dekist data center, who's maintaining the Dekist user tools, is in the best place to write the software and maintain the software that's interacting with the API they're providing.
But they can contribute to SunPy core.
They could. Sure. But why do we have affiliated packages at all, if that's the argument?
Well, I thought that was because we didn't want everything in core. I'd say if we started off, the community was like, yeah, no, we'll just take everything into core. People would have been like, great, we don't have to worry about stuff.
I mean,
I don't know. I guess if you have to add some clients and not others in order for them to work, I would imagine that if you want to use the VSO client, the JSOC client, and then you have to explicitly import the others, then maybe you should have to explicitly import those clients in order to register them with Fido, because then you have to do the same thing, depending on what data sources you want to use. So you have explicit visibility or control over the clients you're using.
I mean, we could definitely start the process, though. I mean, internally in the background, we can move all of the instrument-specific clients to SunKit Instra and import them in SunPy, can't we? Do we not depend on SunKit Instra?
We could, but we would have to have a runtime dependency on instruments.
Oh, we don't already. It's optional.
We have never had that dependency. It's not even optional. It's just a separate package.
Okay, right. Well, that makes things more difficult. The point was that we could start to move things around for the eventuality of maybe making the imports opt-in.
We could do that in core without moving them out.
Yeah. Okay.
In fact, doing that in core would be a 3-line patch in terms of the actual code required to make that work. I think we're kind of agreeing to some extent that making them optional while maybe making some stuff more understandable, right? In fact, actually, the argument for making them optional is effectively we want to put a roadblock in front of the users so that they have to opt into a thing, which is kind of the only tool we have in the box for asking them to understand it. Right, just going back to the Suvi client example, is we don't want the user to get confused by the Suvi data. So we'll make it optional so that they have to import it. And then if they've imported it, they've probably read a document somewhere and maybe they'll, understand it better. Ignoring the obvious point that that's almost certainly false and they're going to copy and paste the import from somewhere on the internet and not give a hoot. Secondly, can we not come up with a better technical solution than that problem? Can we not make the results that Fido prints out contain more information about where and what the data is?
How about for each instrument you define a default client that's being used, and then if someone with prior knowledge and some level of conscience, like the Suvi data is not okay from this data source, but it's okay from the other data source, then has to make a conscient decision to use a different client, and that requires some sort of prior knowledge to do that. And then for all other users, it would be they wouldn't require that knowledge, and it would be transparent to use Fido. And then you basically just require every instrument provider to define what the default client should be, like JSOC, VSO, or Suvi, for example.
Basically request a provider when you do a search. But the other options, the more recent and probably way that I would encourage people to do this now is that you can, when you do a search, you get lots of results, and then you can pick which ones you want to download.
Yeah, I think we should maybe try and ask some users as well. We can take an action. Myself or Laura can ask the guys in Dias about when they use Fido to search for things. What do they understand about what comes back? Because some of this, as Danny said, has to be end user driven. What does someone comes to SunPy for the first time and they want to download some data and do some cool stuff? What what's their experience like, and what are the problems like with the SUVI example where they've got two sets of SUVI data? Like, is that really confusing to them, or is it not a problem? Because I don't know the answer to that. I mean, maybe someone else does, but I certainly don't.
But I think it's even a problem with like the fact that it now returns all available data. An example is that the GOES client returns all available satellite data. Say if the GOES 13 goes to 14 and 15 for a certain date, whereas before it would only give one. And like just from talking to the student chain, they're like, I don't know which one to use. So I just use them all. Like, where it again, it's again documentation and having examples that I think people build off. But again, you're right. We people. Sorry, Danny.
So yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt. But at some point, people do need a certain knowledge of the instrument. Like in that GOES example, you can say, well, just use the latest one. It's probably the best. I mean, that's one way to go. It's often usually valid. But if you're searching for data, it's like, oh, but I don't want to know anything about how the instrument works. I just want the data. It's like, could someone, give me a writepaper.pro, or .py? Like, at some point, we're allowing people to get data, but we're not responsible for them understanding what they're doing. That's their job. They're scientists. I'm making an argument. I'm persuadable.
No, I agree, and I think that's part of the thing about us returning multiple results is we're giving people options, right? And we're expecting them to use their scientific judgment to choose. But I feel like we're also simultaneously doing a bad job of describing what we're putting in front of them. So we're asking them to make that decision, but we're giving them limited to no information about making it.
So you just want to basically somehow technically improve the FIDO search results so that the provider of the data or where it came from is more visible somehow, or more upfront, or more.
Yeah, I agree with that. I was thinking that during the discussion earlier. Like, even if it's just a URL to this is where the data has come from, or this is the README for this data provider.
So a lot of our data provider stuff, the client docstring has a decent amount of information in it. Like the SUVI client docstring is relatively informative. Could be better. All our documentation could be better, but the SUVI client docstring is decent. But there's no way to get to that. Like the only way we are pointing people to that at the moment is because the FIDO results prints SUVI client at the top of its results. So if somebody's feeling really keen, they can copy that and paste it into the search box in our documentation. But I would put good money on it that no person has ever done that in the entirety of the time that our code has existed.
Mm-hmm. They might not know that like Lyra client is something written in Python, or is it a server like the VSO?
In a way, they shouldn't have to care. This is like an intermediate layer. Like they should understand, they should know about the data. FIDO should give them a way of getting to the data that then they have a responsibility to understand. The different like mechanisms that gets them there, I feel like that's one of the strengths that FIDO has, is that it just means users don't have to care about that. Just point me at the data, and then it's my responsibility to know what I'm doing from there.
Yeah. And this kind of goes, another point is like the SunPy docs is really, really good from a code reference point of view and like a user guide of using the code. But like, do we have responsibility to put more solar specific things on the SunPy webpage, and have just an informational page about solar data sources and like a little description about the VSO, a little description about JSON, a little description about each of the instruments that we provide data from and where they come from. And like, so it's not a user guide from a code perspective, but it's like an educational guide, I guess. I don't know. Just think out loud.
We do have an odd issue asking to do exactly that. And that would be something really useful. Yeah, so I think actually, yeah, we should probably maybe something to do on Friday actually.
Yeah, and this kind of builds on that coordinates thing we were talking about the other day. That we said we talked about on Friday as well. We have a little description about solar coordinates for people that like.
Also, you have like a little article on like data sources in SunPy, which would just be like a kind of a longer description about what we have and how it's supposed to work, and then you have an article on coordinates in SunPy and what they are and how it's supposed to work that aren't code reference, they're not user guide either. They're kind of a longer spiel about some topic that's really important to using SunPy.
Yeah, like one example I can kind of Peter Young has like his user docs for like IDL things that he has on his home webpage. I don't know if anyone's used them in the past, but they're really good. And like that's just his own personal, something similar to that, or in context, I guess.
So concretely then somehow improve the visibility of the return of the clients and improve documentation. Is that what we're?
And potentially unlink 4 of the clients in core at least. We don't move.
So, but like, okay, here's a question. If we improve the documentation, picking on Suvi once again. Sorry, Suvi. I don't mean to pick on you this much. Picking on Suvi, the Suvi client again. If we have, say, changed the way that Fido prints the results to make it more clear that a certain set of results have been returned by a specific class in SunPy, that if you're in a notebook, that's clickable and it takes you to the documentation, and maybe we put the first paragraph of the doc string at the top of the results when Fido prints it. So when you see the results from Fido, you see this has come from the Suvi client. Here is 3 sentences describing what the Suvi client is, and here are the results. And you get the same thing for the VSO. Say we've done that, right, as a way of educating our users. Where do people stand on making the Suvi client opt-in? Irrespective of what package it lives in.
For me, as someone who knows that it's there and can import it and understand it, that's perfectly fine. But I go back to Danny's point about the magic of just importing it and it appears. But like maybe that's just the lowest bar that we have to, or like that we have to assume that people understand.
Danny's kind of changed my mind. My earlier comment about making it easier for you guys, for sure, that's great. But the number of times I've gone to say JHelio viewer and the data I want is not any of the channels on there, and I'm on the different channels. I just want the data. I don't care where it comes from. And if you guys can do that, more people are going to use Fido and SunPy, I guess. People are lazy at the end of the day, so you probably just want to have a disclaimer on the front somehow. We can't guarantee the integrity of the data or that it will always be available, but we do our best.
Yeah, I think that again comes back to what is our responsibility as a package and the data we allow people to find and search. Because I feel like when it comes to VSO, the VSO is much clearer in its web UI about where the data comes from, the properties of the data. And obviously, we are, at the end of the day, just returning a very limited AstroPy table.
Rude.
Well, yeah, it's a nice table. Yeah, it's a very nice table, and we spend a lot of time working on that stuff. I'm not gonna.
But no, I get what and well, the point I was trying to make was we can put more information in that table.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily. Yeah, I don't think necessarily the information itself is the issue. As someone who's started working on providing data for money, like I know a lot about when they have questions about data, they come to me. Like I know the answers. But if someone were to, if people come to us, like especially like PhD students who are probably unaware of what necessarily they're doing, and we go, okay, here's SunPy, it's great, have some data, and they try and do something with that data, and it turns out that they have, downloaded the wrong data because they didn't know what they were doing, I would feel partly responsible. I don't know about others, but I would feel partly responsible.
Surely that's user error, though. I mean, that's the same.
There are PhD students. Who remembers walking into the PhD like, I know exactly what I'm about to type into a terminal?
I still don't know what I'm about to type into terminal.
Yeah.
And this goes back to
yeah. But is that our responsibility? Or is that the PhD supervisor's responsibility? Like, we're providing a tool. We're not. We're
not providing the data at the end of the day. Right? We're not responsible for the data because we're not providing the data. However, I do think we're doing a bad job of making that fact clear to people. And one obvious thing is about the amount of VSO bug reports that turn up on the SunPy issue tracker. As an example of how we're not making that clear, right? I look like Alistair wanted to say something.
But I was going to say that if they're obviously going to come to us because they're using our code.
Sure.
So we're going, okay, well, it's actually it might be a bug of the VSO, but we are providing the Python code. You can't go to the VSO and go, oh, this Python library that you don't write is broken.
But no, but you can go to the VSO going, I downloaded this file and it was garbage. For instance, to take a reasonably recent.
I think if a student didn't use like VSO get with IDL or it was just only ever use SunPy to get their data, might not even know what the VSO is. You know what I mean? And yes.
No, that's a fair point.
So, does Ed or Alistair have something they want to say? I feel like I've been trying to talk for a while.
I just wanted to make one comment in that, I guess one thing that people may get a little confused by is that take Subi and VSO, we won't return the same data to a client, at the moment, and because we will only be, we've only been asked to serve level 1, but also we've gone through and we've parsed every file that's in the Go 716 and Go 17 archive, for example, and have excluded all the ones which we know are bad. So, I mean, that's just one example, but we do treat the data a little differently where we can, because with a lot of the clients, we try to validate, the data that we especially in the beginning when we're going to create a data provider, we try to parse a lot of the data that's actually there in order to, validate it. So that we're always going to treat data slightly different, I suspect. And the question is whether or not people just using one of the SunPy clients expect, the same, VSO client and the SunPy clients to return exactly the same data.
I suppose, how do we tell, inform, or make sure that people understand that SunPy doesn't actually have the data and doesn't even get the data? It just provides a link, an intermediary. It's like, how do you make someone read our docs? I don't know. It's difficult.
I can suggest that in 20 years of trying, you probably won't. We get blamed for problems with various data providers and their data, over things with which we have absolutely no control whatsoever, and that hasn't changed in 20 years.
So just in terms of I think just providing a URL to the data source when the results are printed, which I've just posted an example of in the Element chat, I think it goes a long way to helping users understand what data we're giving them.
Yeah, I think so.
We could also push information about the level or the version, for example. If people request a level that's below scientific quality, we could push this other information in a separate dictionary so that people see this as a warning. And if you're knowledgeable, go ahead and use it. But otherwise, and that could be some default config for each FIDO client. So that's defined, predefined. And then that way, when people ask for a lower version or a lower level than scientific quality, they know they're now suddenly getting this stuff, and use it with caution.
I mean, yes. That opens a whole new can of that's almost a whole nother can of worms deeper, right? We're largely talking about educating people that the data is coming from different places. That's a whole level deeper, is then educating them about the data that they're getting back. Right. Like, somebody could search for 171 nanometer data yesterday and get AIA and have no idea what AIA is. Is it our responsibility to tell them what AIA is?
Well, yeah, I suppose, I don't know if this is equivalent to what you said, Stuart, but doesn't that, if we were to do that, then we're taking on responsibility for knowing what's scientific quality and what isn't. In some cases, that may be very, very obvious. In other cases, you could imagine, you start to get close to judgment calls, and all of a sudden SunPy is taking responsibility for people's decisions.
Yeah, I can actually give you an example. I was in a solar orbiter meeting probably a couple of years ago now, and they were going around the room and asking if anyone knew how to use AIA data on there. And somebody said, yes, I know how to do this. And I noticed when they started coding and they shared their screen, they were pulling the data from JHelio Viewer. And they were completely unaware that they were using processed JPEG images. And, I didn't spend long trying to convince them, but I don't know if they've kind of changed their mind or they know what they're doing. But the point is, people, they just probably, whoever said the comment earlier, people are lazy. I'm lazy. I do the same thing, I'm sure. But you have to have like a quick guide and a long guide and hope that people at least have a look at the quick guide. But there probably does need to be a disclaimer somewhere, just somewhere saying, where the data is perhaps coming from.
So I feel like we come back round to the question, which is, given is where we're at the moment, where we just think we should document this better, or
when you say this, do you mean just inform users, do a better job at telling users the nature of the data the search results represent, so they can make
where
a more
the data,
decision?
Where the search results have come from, I guess.
Yeah.
And then does that open the second point that if we were to do that, we then allow any clients into core? Or
all the clients. All the clients.
Yeah, because I mean, let's say we've fixed the user problem with Suvi by documenting it, and now everybody who does any FIDO search is immediately aware of the quirks of Suvi data. by magic. We still have the maintenance question, right? Which is, are we as a project going to continue to maintain that SUFI client? Are we as a project going to continue to maintain the DKIS client if I moved it into core? Where does that end? Right? Would we put David's SAW client in core, despite the potential impedance mismatches there?
To me, it comes down to what the sort of the parameter, the guiding parameterization of like SunPy's purpose, of core's purpose. If it's about, as I've heard said before, that one of the principal things is about data access, then it seems to me that the answer is yes. Then yeah, you just take on everything that you see that isn't duplicating something or is performing a subtly different purpose that could be useful,
or even is duplicating something. Then the users can choose where they get the something from. Right. Yeah. But if that's not what core is, or if that's a too strict interpretation of what was meant when that was said by whoever said it, so yeah, to me it comes down to the it's informed by what the point of core is. And obviously I'm not going to dictate what that is, but it seems that we have to, if we answer that question, then presumably the answer to your question, Stuart, becomes somewhat more self-evident. I'm not sure we have a clear answer to that question, right?
As well, now that you can have FIDO clients outside of core, like there is scope for having them somewhere else. Like you don't have to have them all in core. So like, for example, the Radio Spectra specific clients are going to live in Radio Spectra because that's where they belong to live. And like it wouldn't make sense to have them in core, I don't think.
Wouldn't it?
Well, now that I say that, I'm like, yeah, but because then you go back to this whole Albert thing of I can download the data, but I can't plot it because you'd be able to download it from core, but you wouldn't be able to plot it because you don't have a spectrogram object. So yeah, but I don't know.
I mean, so this could bring us round again, right? Like if oh no, I still have other problems with that. Like we could make it so that if you have Radio Spectra installed, any FIDO search automatically uses the Radio Spectra clients, even if you haven't imported them.
Yeah, I mean, but I think if you have a different package and it serves a different niche goal, like having to do some imports to use stuff, yeah, I don't know. I suppose if you've installed it, you want the radio results. Just like if you install the SOAR client that David wrote, you want them. I don't know.
If someone who wrote the client doesn't want it in core for some reason, then I think SunPy can't or core. I know we all have multiple hats on in this case, but with our core hats on, we shouldn't insist and try some sort of hostile takeover and say no, that belongs in core. But if someone comes to us, I've written this client, I'd like it to be in core. Are we obliged? Do we say no to that, assuming that it's written well enough and isn't literally a copy of the same client that we already have?
I think what Stuart was saying was though that if you have SunPy installed and you install, let's say, Radio Spectra or SOAR, that it would automatically register those clients. So now if you do a FIDO search, it automatically does it for you, and it registers, and you don't have to do an import, versus you have to do an import to register them.
I have other reasons. Just to be clear, I did say that mostly to spark discussion, not because it's a stance I agree with. Just
yeah.
To me, that starts getting down some of the negatives of SSW that we're trying to stay away from, right? Is that, you have things in your path that you're not aware of, and you very quickly, everything starts becoming implicit and becomes very hard for a user to track what is actually going on.
Yeah.
So,
Like, I mean,
no, go on.
no. Sorry, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, are we then in a position where we don't ever envisage putting FIDO clients in SunKit instruments? If we, the SunPy developers, are maintaining it, are they going in core? Which means moving the radio spectra ones in. Whereas, like the DKIST one, if they say the DKIST data center, for sake of argument, were like, no, we don't want to have to maintain that in SunPy, we're going to maintain it in our own package, that would exist in the DKIST package. But any SunPy clients that the SunPy developer team maintain go in core. Is that where we are?
That doesn't sound great. There's going to be a lot of, I mean, a specific example. There's like a whole slew of little niche radio spectrograms that operate in tiny little backwaters. So there's going to be like an absolute nightmare of clients in radio spectra. And I don't think that they belong in core, specifically because you can download a spectrogram, but then you can't plot it. So, yeah.
I think that's a clear line between like radio analysis and other random solar data. You know, there is a clear line there, but with other instruments like Lyra or GBM or something like that, you know, they're just been thrown into Instru without, it's hard to find them then, right? Where if you're looking for radio data, you can Google like, you know, SunPy radio data, and you come across radio spectra, whereas you might not come across SunPy Instru. And yeah, drawing the lines a bit harder, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think we want clients serving data that we can't read and visualize in SunPy.
That is already the case. You can download Iris data through VSO. You can't load it
unless you have Iris Pi / Sunraster.
In core,
right? No, I know.
You can download the data in core. You can't load the data in core. That rule does not work.
Well, I'm suggesting that maybe it should.
But then we'd have to move the VSO client out. Like, the VSO provides data we can't load in core.
No. Clients that exclusively provide data we can't read in core do not belong in core, is my suggestion.
Okay.
So if you had a specific client that provided slit spectrogram data, that shouldn't live in core. It should live in its own little sub-package, wherever that is. Or spectrogram data, for example.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean,
unless SunPy grows the ability to read that, SunPy core grows the ability to read that data in.
Well, when everything is in ND cube, it will all be fine.
We can put the clients in ND cube.
No vetoing that right now.
Seems like a plan. Hyper. I don't know.
The best plan, make it Danny's problem.
Fortunately, that's already written out of NDQ's mission statement. It is not about data reading.
I would probably say that we've come to a natural end.
I feel like somebody should write some of this down. I feel like the discussion has come to an end, but we haven't necessarily come to a clean conclusion.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I'm writing some notes. So what is the group decision on this? I'm writing decision, :
So I guess the first decision we came to just now was clients that we can't open by core. Sorry, clients that serve data exclusively we can't open by core. Don't go into core. I think we all agreed. clients.
It's a pretty good suggestion, yeah.
I'm going to say old clients that serve duplicate data to the VSO will eventually be moved out to Instra.
No,
Maybe.
I mean,
I don't think
no,
that was a
I'm not
decision.
convinced that that's where we've come to.
It's worth a shot.
Sorry, Nabil.
Okay, they'll be moved out into their own package.
Nabil's like, get rid of them. Get it off me.
Okay, so I'll just cross that out.
I mean, is it worth
I think
like?
you said that we.
Sorry.
Sorry. No, sorry. Go for it.
I was going to just quickly say, like, maybe we should make it an action item where to think about talking to users, to people that use it, and what's, kind of scope out what's confusing and what's not clear in a way of kind of making the documentation a bit better.
I was just going to say, I think that we all agreed that we need to make it more clear what happens when you search FIDO and where the data comes from.
Yes, I think that example that David put in the channel, I think in the wrong... we have so many coordination rooms that I'm not sure what channel it was in.
Oh yeah, that's not the right coordination channel.
We have too many rooms with coordination in the title, and that needs to be fixed. So there's work to be done on improving the presentation of the information that FIDO can give you in its wrapper from a search. And I guess the question there would be, the question there is figuring out what we want to just return. Is the URL just enough? They're just going, okay, from, and then printing out the base URL. Would that be enough? Do we need...
Is it the name of the client, the URL to the data source, and like the start of the client doc string, I think are the things that were mentioned during the body of the discussion.
Yeah, the issue with the start of the client doc string is that could be a very long
disciplined
start.
with the start of the client doc string, but that's fine. We can do that. I think it's worth doing. I think that is worth doing. Is like, write a client, make the first paragraph of the doc string concise and useful.
Right. So and then I guess the other thing we decided is to leave the other clients alone in call. I think that's what we...
Yes.
They've started to become a bit incontinent and a bit messy, but you don't want to, bring them to the vet just yet.
And I guess like a policy about accepting new clients. I guess we want to... New clients
are an interesting one. There's a big difference between... people have said if somebody rocks up with a client, we were to sous vide 2, the return of the sous vide. Somebody rocks up with a client for it, whose name happens to be Stephen, and maybe we would accept that. But is our stance going to be we kind of discourage that, and the first port of call is get the VSO to do it? Does that seem fair from both the SunPy and VSO sides of the people on this call?
I think it sounds sensible to me. Yeah.
Ed?
What does
Alistair?
VSO say?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah.
So before writing a new client, someone should always get in touch with VSO first.
I mean, it feels like a much more appropriate division of labor to some extent, right? We don't want to be maintaining the code or working out how the data provider works. if we don't have to. And I'm sure the VSO don't want to work out about how to load the data into SunPy either. So.
And realistically, I mean, the people who are going to write clients are probably on this call or like close by. So, you know, I don't think anyone's just going to appear magically tomorrow with a fully written client. You know,
it seems more unlikely for certain, yeah. Unless their name happens to be Stephen, yeah.
Okay, I've put that down as a decision because it sounds like there's consensus between SunPy and VSO. Is there anything else that we needed to decide on as part of this ping pong discussion? Because that's now 4 or 5 decisions that have been documented.
Oh, good. Oh, goodness me. Right, we all better go and lie down quick.
Yeah. Once they're documented, it's real whether or not people actually sort of, you know, agreed to it during the conversation.
I think this also probably means writing somewhere in our development docs this up, and then we can ping everyone for review when that's done. But I guess if anyone has any objections, I will rant about time series. Well, it won't be really a rant. It'll just be a. So I guess if the VSO people want to, you know, reclaim the rest of their day, thank you for coming. It's been very useful.
Yeah. Cheers.
Thanks. I'm gonna go hop in the pool with my inflatable unicorn.
Yep.
Sounds fantastic.
That sounds like a great plan.
Yeah.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Thanks.
So the last bit of today is time series, and specifically, what do we do about time series?
What do we do about leap seconds?
Yep, that's pretty much what I've. Here's my second terrible slide of the day. So just to recap, what time series is, it's basically a reader. That's all it is. It just reads data and allows you to plot. I think it was initially created when pandas was like 0.0. I think it was before like pandas like really hit its stride. I feel like that's when time series was written.
It's pretty old. It does, yeah. The main things that time series do are loaders,
and plotting.
Loaders, plotting, metadata. Its metadata handling is actually pretty good.
Yeah,
and units.
I was going to make it. I made a bullet point. Separate metadata class.
Sorry.
I like it. It's nice.
Are you feeding the seagulls, Danny? Are they your pets? I mean, what's happening?
I'm just that close to the coast, and they're big bastards. They're really mean-looking mudders.
Don't anger a seagull. Seagull.
Yeah.
Seagull, do you in?
I never really appreciated how close to the coast the city center is until I kind of basically lived in it.
So, what's the problem with? Okay, what was the problem that I had to come up with time series for this talk? Was that because time series was written in a way before pandas really took off, and before AstroPy time series was even a glint in Tom Robitaille's eye. I'm pretty sure he was the one that wrote it, didn't he? He was the one that wrote that.
Yeah, primarily.
Yeah, see, it works. He literally wrote the code.
I wasn't laughing at it because I was wrong. I was just enjoyed it. Was all.
That a lot of, as people have come to us, especially David, who's been using a lot of time series, comes out and wants methods on time series that we have to implement them. And a lot of the time we implement them, obviously our API is technically agnostic to what we use underneath, but we have to ultimately, in this case for reindex, we use pandas. And if we were to implement other methods that allow people to do other common time series functionality, we would probably also then be using pandas. And underneath, we would be tying, again, the API isn't tied to pandas, but we are essentially tying ourselves to pandas. And obviously, a lot of the properties on time series itself are also pandas properties. They are one-to-one. And they all index the original pandas data frame underneath. And the problem with pandas is that leap seconds exist.
No, they don't. They're not real.
Nice.
And the Python standard library does not support leap second time. The standard library has a terrible datetime library and doesn't support leap seconds. AstroPy time does, but obviously because pandas essentially is using daytimes underneath, it doesn't support leap seconds. And when someone tried to load in what was the file? I forgot what the file was on the mailing list.
XRF, wasn't it?
The XRS file has leap seconds in, and it explodes because, well, Panda
it has
doesn't
leap seconds in it.
Yeah. And so we have a decision about what do we type time series to? The obvious answer would be might be now AstroPy time series, but AstroPy time series is still, well, it's still kind of rough. And I wrote some of it, and it's still really rough. And so tying ourselves to that is, to my mind, too early.
Why?
Because the API, you do not need to see how you re-index data in AstroPy time series.
Okay, all right, hang on. All right.
I've skipped through this because we've got 20 minutes, so and I don't want to.
Yeah, so I think there's an important difference. There's an important note here, which is what we are discussing is changing the default internal representation of the data to be AstroPy table. That does not mean that, barring leap second shenanigans, the user cannot continue to interact with a data frame.
Yeah, so obviously the API time series, the API for time series is underneath of the data agnostic, and it shouldn't affect users, and they can still transform probably with a context flag or something to pandas, because obviously we have to also decide how we're going to
We have a two data frame method on time series at the moment. That would continue to work in exactly the same way as it works at the moment. It would just be the .data attribute returns a AstroPy table. We could even allow assigning to the .data on a time series to take a data frame.
Can I ask a quick question?
Mm-hmm.
If we were going to use AstroPy time series underneath, why not just get rid of SunPy time series in favor of AstroPy time series?
That is also a valid question.
I was going to ask the same question.
Yeah, I didn't want to open this can of worms.
Yeah.
That was the can of worms.
Okay, worms everywhere. The main things we would need to do to subclass time series instead of encapsulate AstroPy time series would be we would need to upstream or implement in our subclass the metadata handling, because our metadata handling is a lot better than AstroPy tables metadata handling. And
sorry, great question, but what does metadata handling do in time series? I've never used it.
Each cell can have its own
kick-ass.
metadata dictionary.
Yeah, so
if you take two time series, you load one from an XRS file and one from a Lara file, and you put them together, or you take two XRS files and you can concatenate them, the metadata tracks the headers of those files through those operations. So if you concatenate two files together, the top half of the column has one metadata. The metadata, it knows the metadata for the time range for that column.
Cool. Great. Thanks.
Is AstroPy time series based on AstroPy tables?
Yes.
Okay.
AstroPy time series is an AstroPy table that has a time object as its index and has a bunch of time series specific manipulation methods on it.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense.
How do they compare to pandas? I know the answer is going to be like pandas has got a lot more funding, all the rest of it, but from like a core essential point of view, how does it compare?
So I would argue that the way we've implemented time series, it wouldn't matter because a lot of the method we don't have a lot of methods on time. Unlike map, that has a bajillion methods. Time series has a very specific collection of them that wouldn't break time series in any meaningful way if we were to make that change.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I was just as this is a stupid question, but the only way to go from like times that have leap seconds to times that don't have leap seconds is just to drop the leap seconds.
Yep.
There's no other alternative, is there? Like you just have to get rid of them because you can't represent them in the.
Yeah, you have to.
Correct.
Okay, so basically all we have to do to go from an AstroPy time series to a data frame is just drop the leap seconds, basically. And
would be warning on that?
What I would propose is, say we change to using AstroPy time series by default, we would load into an AstroPy time series, and then in the two data frame method could have a flag which is discard leap seconds, and it just drops the rows. Or it could have a leap seconds equals drop. Do whatever, like you could, whatever you want to do with it. AstroPy table also has the ability to put other AstroPy objects in as columns, such as sky coord. So in the same way you can have a time as a column, you can have a sky coord as a column. So you could have position of PSP as a column in a full sky coord.
Would it then, if you wanted, then could you transform that to say what the time it would be at Earth? Taking into account light travel time. If it does that.
Ooh, say that again.
That would be cool. Like, say if you had an observation of PSP, or say like solar orbiters, and you have a time at which that observation was taken and a sky coordinate which was taken, could you transform that to what the time that would be at Earth, right? So you're taking into account light travel time. If you wanted to compare it.
Why not? I mean, probably not automagically, but you could easily write that.
That would be nice, I'd say. How is it done at the moment, Shane, or is there a thing in SunPy or?
There is. It uses the spice kernels directly. Because they're like the most accurate version of the data that I know. Yeah, you have to have the spice kernels in, which is super annoying because they're just ridiculous in every way possible.
Yeah.
But if you, in SunPy, if you transform an observed coordinate from one observer to the other, that will take into account light travel time. The way. If Albert was on, he'd probably correct me, but I'm pretty sure the way he's implemented the coordinate system,
the coordinate transform would, but I think what I understood Laura to be asking was whether you could transform the time index of the time series to the time you would have seen the thing at Earth.
Yeah, because basically like a 6 time series could be up to 5-6 minutes, 5 minutes different to Earth. I think is the maximum it gets to. So you got to shift it by. Yeah.
Really? I would have thought it's up to like 15. Because
maybe it is. I can't remember.
when we're doing operations, it can be up to like half an hour round trip, like travel time when we're issuing commands. So presumably, if it's taking data around that time.
Okay, I suppose for sticks, if it's on the far side, you can't see X-rays, so there's no point in shifting it. So like it's only up to it can be more. Okay, fine, it can be more.
No, I was just not correcting. I was just curious as to if there was some constraint I wasn't aware of when it came to like the FITS file data.
No. Sorry,
I think from a time series point of view, and for someone who uses time series a lot, once there's the functionality there to convert it into a pandas time series or a pandas series if you wanted to, then happy out. And I think maybe AstroPy tables makes more sense.
The other point I'd like to potentially counter-ish that, and referring to what Nabil said earlier, is that we don't have a lot of methods on time series. I think we haven't had to because people say, "Oh, it's great! It's in this time series. I've got these few extra." It's basically a pandas data frame or series with these few specific Solr cases. And if we just change it, we can say, well, nothing that we've developed has changed. But you could potentially say, well, like users all their code might break because they are doing .data .pandas.
We have thrown a warning on .data on time series for quite a while, saying you probably don't actually mean .data. Use to-data frame.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of like the people. That's kind of well enough established now that if it was still the fact that you had time series and you go .to-data frame, and underneath it's just doing on a table, that should be okay, I guess. But again, yeah, that's just
so. If you want to, I don't know. It's been a long. I used to use time series quite a bit, but it's been years since I've really used it properly now. Things like that you do in pandas, like I don't know, fill NA or like resample, these sorts of things. Can you do those directly from time series now, all that stuff? Or
we added a reindex methods 2 weeks ago, and there is a draft PR for, I think, a resample.
But I feel like we're going down a hole now of that soon all of the pandas methods are going to be added in. People will want them more and more.
This is the flaw with encapsulation as a software development methodology. Right. We're encapsulating the data frame. We're not subclassing it, so we don't have the methods of the object.
So I think
then we convince AstroPy to add all the methods onto the time series, and then we'll be fine.
To some extent, that's a valid approach, right? The AstroPy time series exists for a series of defensible reasons, and it wants to be good, so PRs are welcome.
That defensible reason isn't really defensible.
AstroPy table and time series exist for defensible reasons. You might not agree with them, but there are at least reasons. We do not need to turn this discussion into should AstroPy table exist, because that's.
In the short term, we can change the underlying representation to be an AstroPy table, and from the outside, the only thing that changes is that .data would be an AstroPy table rather than the data frame, and you can still use two data frame to get your data frame to do all your nice pandas things.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
Yeah. And it's been a warning long enough, I think, that people don't work really with .data anymore.
So I do.
Oh, okay.
Well,
and
someone has been reading the warnings.
I did.
Yeah, why?
Because I have 2 million data points, and it's very efficient to use pandas to process them.
But you could use two data frame.
But I want to be able to set the data in place once I process it. I don't want to be faffing around converting 2 million data points from a pandas data frame to an AstroPy table and back every time I want to do something on it.
Fair. Can't argue that.
If there's not a performance hit in doing that, great. But I would want to check there isn't a significant performance hit in doing that.
Yeah. Actually, in building that, David, I basically just use that the time series as a loader, and then I just put everything into a data frame. I don't go back to putting it into.
Well, that's somewhat damning, isn't it? shouldn't we just have a loader that loads this into pandas data frames then?
I mean, to be honest, this goes back to why don't we just drop time series altogether and make it AstroPy table? Because if we wrote all of our loaders as plugins to AstroPy IO, you could do AstroPy time series dot load. It would give you an AstroPy table, and then you would do 2 pandas, and you'd have a pandas data frame.
The biggest argument against that currently, I think, as far as I'm aware, and again, people are able to tell me I'm wrong, is the metadata handling. So if metadata became its own object, that...
Well, it doesn't matter. Pandas is never going to carry around our metadata for us. AstroPy table could carry around... We could make AstroPy table have our metadata handling, either upstream or not, depending. They would probably take it upstream. I see no reason why they wouldn't.
Yeah, and the other reason I do use time series is for the units as well.
Yes, of course, units, yeah.
So yeah, that is kind of the reason why I don't exclusively just do stuff in pandas.
Yeah, metadata units.
But like, what could you? Yeah, I mean, if you really want native unit support, you really just want to use AstroPy time series anyway. That being said, I think there is now at least some support in pandas for like foreign object classes. So you could put quantities in a pandas time data frame now, I think. And I think pandas are maybe talking about, or maybe that's X-ray. Actually, that might be X-ray. Ignore me.
Yeah, I think you can have the index be an object right now in pandas. It's bitten me in the ass a couple of times, actually.
So then, other than a possible performance hit in having to convert between AstroPy tables and pandas data frames when you're setting attributes, is there any objections to switching to AstroPy tables as the internal representation? Or time series, sorry.
Well, performance is, I mean, it's hard to... That seems to be the biggest reason to potentially object. Well, I say biggest.
But
there's still a lot of
though. I mean, I just need to test it to see if there is a performance. I mean, maybe there is, maybe there isn't. But
yeah, fair enough.
I do have
the only other thing then is, sorry, go ahead, Shane.
I do have a semi-serious question that, I mean, I think I know the answer now. But why isn't this some sort of ND sequencer cube? Like long term.
That, I think that's a good question, and I think in my mind I've always thought, well, you know, handling time and wanting to do like multiple columns, it's slightly different to how NDCube was envisaged. It doesn't mean that it's incompatible, but to me anyway, I haven't like really convinced myself that there isn't inherent value in like the time specific objects that currently exist over trying to create like a time cube, you know, a 1D time cube.
Sounds like something out of Doctor Who.
Yeah. Yeah, and like, so I think that's it. It just really hasn't been I think it takes effort to work through that and convince oneself that going the NDCube route is the right one. It might be.
Our follow-on question would be that if you did extract like a 1D time series from an NDCube, would we support turning it into a time series object? Because that's essentially what it is.
Well, now we're going back to Hypercube, like Albert's original idea of Hypercube, which, like, depending on what slice you take of the cube, depending on the axes that it has, it actually returns not an ND cube, but like a higher level objects like map or time series or spectrogram or something. That doesn't actually answer your question, but that's where we're at.
Okay. Yeah, no, again, it's just a long-term question. It just seems odd to have different things, but I guess they serve different purposes. So, sorry, Laura.
I was going to say actually the same thing. Like if you had in the future like a sequence of maps, right, and it's an ND cube sequence, and then you want to make a time series where you sum everything along that map, or you only need each pixel, and then you could have a cube of time series. It would be cool if you had like a 1D and like cube of, I don't know, a time series of each pixel. That's a time series. Yeah,
that's kind of what I was going. If you stack like a whole bunch of AI images, co-align them, and then you want to take a time series out of an individual pixel to do like a Fourier transform or something. I mean, obviously you can do that, but it just seems odd that you have one representation when it's a time series from a map and a different representation when it's a time series from a, I don't know, goes.
I mean, the other wild and wacky way of suggestion is that you have you register methods on an ND cube based on its physical axes. So it knows that, oh, this got a time axis, therefore you want all these time-related methods. And then again, this is, I think, something along the lines of Albert's idea of what a hypercube might be.
I guess it's just something to keep in mind. Like, I mean, it doesn't have to be implemented now, but just in the future. There could be scope for it to be there.
It would be philosophically very satisfying if effectively an ND cube was like a map, a spectrogram, a time series. It just did everything. I'm not sure I ever want to be responsible for that. But from a philosophical point of view, without having to do any work, that does sound kind of cool.
It sounds like we're moving towards making it an AstroPy time series then.
Yes, well done. Bring us back.
Well, that is not the outcome I expected, but I'll take it as a win anyway.
Yeah. I was always pushing back on this, and then I think it was David said last time, like it would look the same to the user, and you can have all the same methods on it. I was like, oh yeah, it actually doesn't matter. This makes more sense. So,
I mean, I think the major issue is what David said about if you want to modify it in place, you can't basically. That's the bit of functionality you lose, is if you really want to operate in place on a data frame. To be fair, we never really supported that anyway, because if you operate in place in the data frame, the metadata object isn't necessarily going to be valid anymore. So why ever go back to the time series object?
Yeah, I guess because I never used the metadata and never thought about that. But yeah, I don't know. It sounds to me that Pandas has issues that are probably not solvable in the short to medium term, such as leap seconds and units and metadata. And those are problems better solved in AstroPy time series.
We could.
And then it's
Sorry, just interrupt.
Sorry.
We could. I don't know if anyone's done this recently, but we could try to replace the index of a time series pandas data frame with AstroPy times, and see what happens.
There's no way that's going to work. It's one thing putting a different object in a column. It's another thing asking pandas to re-index a time object.
I might do that just for fun.
I mean, try it. Hell, why not? But I just press X to doubt, majorly doubt.
What will probably happen is that several methods will break, but that should be okay. So there's like things you can do like .dt on an index, and it will then work you out the frequency. But obviously, if it's on an object array, it's probably just going to error, or probably just return. Actually, no, it won't error. It will return none. It does that.
I'm quite curious about. I'm quite curious as to whether anybody has the time/motivation to look at what happens if we inherited AstroPy time series instead of encapsulated it. Like, could we drop time series in favor of AstroPy time series? Because that is a bigger change. But at the same time, it's also actually not that much of a bigger change. Like, if we're going to be using it anyway.
So I guess, can you rewrite our readers to spit out an AstroPy time series?
Well, I mean, AstroPy has a unified I/O infrastructure. So the AstroPy time series .load class method is pluggable. We could implement our readers as AstroPy readers and then continue to maintain the factory interface for consistency if we wanted to. I have not looked into that enough to know if that's tractable and godforsaken amount of work or a really good idea.
From what I recall, it wasn't that hard to plug into that interface. Because I think I wrote the first attempts at what was the NASA mission? I forget what it was. It was Kepler. It was Kepler. That was the one. I recall it being fairly straightforward, but that's been like 3 years now. So memory soothes all time soothes all problems.
I guess the other thing is,
by definition in this case,
do we want to revert the addition of a resample method to our time series object and not go down the rabbit hole of adding those methods if we're going to make such big changes in the future anyway?
Well, if we inherit from time series, we'd get AstroPy's resample method. If we don't inherit from time series, we would still want a resample method.
But I guess the question is, can we really guarantee the resample method will give implementation independent results?
Sorry, implementation independent, is that what you said?
Yeah, so as in like in SunPy 3.1 we could add a resample method that uses pandas to resample. But then if in 4.0 we're like, oh, we're going to use AstroPy instead of pandas, then I imagine it would be a lot of work, if not impossible, to make sure the results from our resample method are identical using pandas and AstroPy.
I imagine if you make a change to use a different implementation, you're kind of open to the results changing.
Yeah, but
that can be part of the, yeah.
But from a user point of view,
no, I know, yeah.
Do we want to provide that API when we know it might change?
Oh, right.
Right. Because sorry, as in this is functionality that isn't in a release yet.
Yeah. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
I would say we should revert that pending making or working out if these major changes are feasible to do.
It does seem sensible to not dig ourselves holes. So, yeah, I'm probably pro that.
Okay, let's call the decision then. Cool. Anything else? We wrapped up on time series discussion there?
Yeah. Oh, we're sorry, we went over. I didn't realize. Yeah, light curve is also one of the reasons that I think AstroPy time series probably shouldn't exist, or they should just become AstroPy time series. But that's a different. It's a different argument to be had for a different time. Yeah. I want to thank everyone for coming today. It's been as lively as I guess I expected it to be. And tomorrow we will be discussing governance. Wow, that'd be
That is, if I think about it, yeah.
In the morning, we'll be talking about database and composite map. The composite map? Yeah, composite map.
Is composite map, is that in the context of NDQ objects? Or is that something
in the context of whatever Stuart wants it to be?
I guess
Partly
should I make a
NDQ.
priority to be there?
Partly
Look at
NDQ, partly reproject.
Okay, so I definitely should be there for that. Not that I wasn't
Probably
planning on
wise.
being there, but it's good to know about an explicit reason.
Cool. I'm going to head off then.
Good. Yes.
See you all tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Bye, everyone.
Later. Thanks, everyone.